Ladies and gentlemen, the program will begin in 10 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, the program will begin in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and silence all cell phones. The program is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lucy Arnaz and Todd Purdom with Sam Wasson.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hi. This is Todd. This is Lucy. Excuse me. I hope we could get into like we could channel Lucy and Desi and get into kind of a couples therapy situation. and that would be my hope at least. But first I wanted to start, before we get into Desi and represent Lucy in terms of, Lucy, if you think she's been well represented in any of the biographies.
Oh, no.
This
is very exciting.
Getting some other room. Sorry, we're missing it.
The question that I have is, as somebody who has been witnessed their mother being written about their whole lives, has anyone got it right?
It's like Groundhog Day. Good morning, Judge. Good morning.
Should we ask her?
That's wild. Has anybody gotten it right?
And what does right mean?
Well, I think my mic is on.
Oh.
I want the other girl's mic. Can I have her mic? That seems to be a really good. That's okay. I work in the theater. I don't need a mic.
But you do for the live stream,
For the live stream, I definitely do. What happened? Is it gone? Is it not on?
Didion has your microphone.
Oh, Didion.
Okay, great. There you go. I know how to. Oh, well, good. Thank
good.
you.
Hi, guys.
Did anybody get it right? Yeah, the book called Desi Lou, written by Tom Gilbert and Steve Saunders, was pretty accurate all the way through. It wasn't really a personal story. It was more about the business, but he did tell a lot of personal stories. I think the only person who's gotten it right so far was my mother, my father, and Todd Purdom.
Yep. That's the answer I was looking for.
That's the truth, though. That is the truth.
Yeah.
Everybody else sort of wrote stuff that was unauthorized, and they made up things that they didn't really, they couldn't get an answer from me or anybody else, so they just made it up. And yeah, but it's not that hard, you know. She doesn't have that complicated. You just have to do real research like he does.
Yeah.
Most people. Yeah.
Todd, was that one of the reasons why you took on the project, because you were dissatisfied with the material that was out there?
Well, I certainly was dissatisfied with the material that was out there about Desi, and you know, the pair has been written about. There have been, I don't know, a shelf of biographies about your mom.
Yeah.
As you say, a very good book about the Desi Lou enterprise by Tom and Steve, and then, of course, your dad's memoir, which is coming out in a reissue next month.
Right. It's going to be reissued in February.
But there hadn't ever been a book about him, and I knew from the beginning that I really didn't feel I could do it if I didn't have Lucy's cooperation. And blessedly, she gave me not only her cooperation but her trust and now her friendship, and I'm so grateful for that. So yeah, someone suggested to me that a Princeton friend, a college friend, Doug McGrath, who was a playwright and actor and director, that Desi's story had been undertold throughout history. And the more I looked at it, the more I was persuaded that was true. And I think, Lucy, that when people tell you how much they admire your mother, your answer is, I had a father too. So
I tried not to say that, but there was a time when you want to say, gosh, but it did say, I love Lucy. the show was about her. And up until recently, a lot of people didn't realize what a huge part my father played in the creation of the show, and how important it is to have a great straight man and somebody to play off of. They didn't make that stuff up. I feel like I'm talking like my mother. If she was sitting here now, she would be going, oh, yeah, we did the best we could. But she would credit the writers. It's funny, here we are at the Writers' Fest. She really respected writers more than anything, and she had 3 of the best, and then 6 or whatever, 4 or 5. So really, it was so beautifully crafted, and the combination of my father's instinct and, tenacity and the smarts of people like Jess Oppenheimer and Madeline Pugh, Bob Carroll Jr. There've never been a team like them since, I don't think, that worked as well together. And two people for how many? 4 years writing all those shows. Now there's a writer's room of 20 people for almost every show. It's crazy.
Madeline Pugh said they used to hope that President Truman would make a speech on Monday night so they could have a week off and catch up with the script.
Yeah.
So what was it that McGrath said that got you hooked?
Well, in 2001, on the 50th anniversary of the show, the New York Times Arts and Leisure section ran twin pieces about the anniversary, one about Lucy. I forget who wrote that, but Doug wrote the one about Desi. And he said that, Desi knew we should love Lucy before we did. And that Desi was really the driving engine behind getting the show on the air, getting it its means of production, owning the rights to it because of the way that it got produced and the agreement he had with CBS, and that he was the engine that made the whole thing happen. And I think it's fair to say that to the end of your mother's life, she always gave him credit for that.
Always. Even at the worst of their, before their divorce, when they were really at each other's throat, and somebody came and interviewed her about the show, and she still, that day, her eyes were still red from crying. And she said, well, it's all Desi. Desi did it. Desi did it from the beginning. Carol Cook tells that story in our documentary. Yeah.
So I felt, that it was really worth telling. And also, this was 2020 when I was beginning the project, and that was a moment in our culture when there was an intensive reexamination of people whose contributions might have been overlooked because they didn't look or sound like everybody else in the mainstream of America.
There was that.
And Desi is Exhibit A of that.
Yeah.
And he was, I think, throughout much of his lifetime and ever since, as George W. Bush would say, misunderestimated because people thought he was a guy who talked funny, and they didn't understand the genius behind him. And also, he was really a self-taught. He only had a high school education, but he was a deep learner, a deep reader. He had a very excellent vocabulary. If you read his letters and things that he wrote, he had a tremendous command of written English. He argued. He would acknowledge that the spoken version left. He kept a sign in his house that said "English broken here," but
That's right.
But infinite talent and infinite charm.
Well, you mentioned the letters. Now, there's so much to talk. It's Desi, Lucy, the show, the Desi Lou, and the writing of this book, and also Lucy's book. There's so much to talk about. You have to forgive me for asking a biographer's question, or maybe don't forgive me. But you mentioned the letters, and for me, one of the revelations of the book was the access and the material that you got from Lucy. And I'm wondering, was letting that stuff go? Was it giving that over hard? Did you discover new material in the course of
No, I don't know what happened, but this man came to talk to me about writing this book, and all you have to do is meet him and talk to him for 10 minutes, and you go. And I had read the previous book that he wrote about Rodgers and Hammerstein, Something Wonderful, which is also on sale in the bookshop over there. And I love the way he writes, and I mostly love the way he researches. And I thought, if anybody's going to be able to go deep on my father's story, they have to really want to get it right. And it's work, and it can't just be frivolous writing. It can't be movie star writing. And so I don't know, I had an instinct, like somebody was on my shoulder going, it's okay, let him do it. And I said, what did I say to you? I don't even remember. I just said, I'll give you whatever I got.
You
what
said,
do you
come
want?
out and I'll show you what. But the one thing that she kept, which is totally understandable, is these wonderful private letters, mostly from World War II when they were separated. And these are love letters that show, really how much the title of the show is totally true. And this is for sale too, and I highly recommend it. It's an absolutely beautiful book.
Each other's best PR people.
And we
But
didn't
I
even
just
make
wanted him, I wanted him to tell the truth. My father's a fascinating person. He had a lot of warts, you know, they say warts and all. He was covered in warts, and he also was extraordinarily intelligent and inventive and gregarious and the best host on the planet and one of the best parents you could ever have. And yet his memory has sort of been clouded with, he was a drunk and a womanizer. And that hurts, even when it's sort of true, but both can be true. Mm-hmm. As we know, in real life, we all have members of our family that we love and who have stuff you'd wish was different, right? Your moms, your dads, your aunts, your uncles, your brothers, your sisters. And I wanted someone smart, like a Todd Purdom, to take on the task of figuring out who Desi Arnaz was. I did the best I could with my documentary, and someday I might write about it a little more, but I don't really want to go deep, deep, deep into my family history when I write a book. I'll write about them like they're my parents, like you would write about your parents, you know. But there are people who do it better than me, and I just said, just be truthful and be kind, and he understood the man, and he agreed that he would do that, and that is exactly what he did.
I have to say, one of the other great resources that Lucy shared with me is when she and Larry produced this wonderful documentary about her parents, about almost 4
It was
years ago.
1993, won the Emmy in 93.
And it was Emmy-winning documentary. She conducted oral history interviews with virtually everyone who'd collaborated with them, family members, childhood friends, and she has all those transcripts which she lent me, and those are a priceless resource to have the voices of people who are no longer with us, and rounding out the perspective. And some of the particularly vivid insights came from, say, you know, some of your mother's childhood friends who talked about how people don't understand that with all funny people, there's usually a great deal of pain behind their lives. And both your parents had, I think, what we would call now childhood trauma.
Yeah,
and they
PTSD,
spent their lives processing or not processing it. And I have to believe that was also part of what, in some ways, drew them together and held them together, that they are each dealing with their own.
Caretakers, too. They took care of their own family that had both of their families had been destroyed by either by revolution or by poverty and terrible circumstances. And so when they got a little bit of success, it was their responsibility to care for their family members, and nobody was caring for them, you know. So here's two caretakers. My husband sort of figured that out when we were doing the documentary. He said, look at them, they're two caretakers hoping that they'll meet somebody who will take care of them. And that's why they crashed into one another, because they couldn't get, wait, you're supposed to take care. No, you're supposed to take care, you know. And you don't get that.
And for their whole adult lives, their whole marriage, they had responsibility for their mothers, particularly, and they were part of the menage of their lives, and they were, you know, really in a reverse parenting role with their parents.
Also, I think family history is a fascinating subject to me, and I think people are good intrinsically. They're good, and if something has gone wrong, there's a reason for it. If you're leaning towards something that is bad for you, there's a reason for that. Why is that? And you can go back and try to figure that out. That's fascinating. And, you know, there are people in our country right now who are fascinating. You want to say, why did that happen? You know, and...
Couldn't their mothers have hugged them a little bit more?
But that's the truth. Mothers hugging them, or someone telling them that you're okay, or not saying you're a piece of crap, you know. You're never going to make it. Or something really tragic happens in their family that they never get help with. Like in my mom and dad's family, there was none of that personal abuse, which is great. They were a victim of circumstances. He lost everything in the most tragic way in the Cuban Revolution in 1933. And my mother had a very happy family, but not very, you know, they didn't have much money. They were pretty poor, but there was death, and there were all kinds of accidents, and it was just traumatic, one right after the other for her as a kid. And her mother was gone a long part of the time, so that created this stiffness in her and a hardness, because she had to take care of herself, you know. And my father had another feeling, which was, I had everything, I lost everything in one fell swoop, and so, you know, I'm just going to party because it could all go away tomorrow. They're going to do it again, you know.
What I learned writing Hollywood history is that Hollywood is a community of caretakers from day one. That is how someone goes into show business, and that caretaking starts in the kitchen and at the dinner table. and mom is worried or dad is worried or something's not okay, and then the child has to stand up and put on a show to make everything better. This is a story that I find...
I can 100% identify with that.
Right.
Yeah, you have to take care of they're wounded soldiers. And they don't mean to be. They don't mean to not be doing the job. They're just preoccupied with their own crazy pain that they're still trying to deal with, you know. Larry has a thing when he goes out and he talks to people, kids in schools and stuff, or acting classes, and he says, all right, how many of you out there came from dysfunctional families? Raise your hand. And they said, and the rest of you are lying. As actors, it almost inevitably you come from a family that's a little twisted, and that's how you play it out. It's good. His book is called Effective Memories, and it's all because all this stuff that happens to you is valuable at some point for an actor.
It's valuable for a writer, too, because Nora Ephron quoted her mother, everything is copy. And I mean, or another way of saying it is everything in life is narrative material. And if you absorb the adventures you have and repurpose them. But both your parents had really interesting, fascinating lives. And the other thing about it is that their combination was sort of catalytic. Each made the other better, each lifted the other up, and never before or after did they ever do anything that was quite as magical as what they did together. And that's a great story too.
That is the truth.
And it was a love story, and you get that from both of your books, even though your approach to the love story is different.
Yeah, well, I keep telling people, it's not my book. I didn't write this book. I'll write a book someday. I'll write bunches of books, but I didn't write this book. This is all their words. I wrote I think a pretty good afterword, or like introduction to it, rather. No, it's the afterword I did on my dad's book. I'm getting so confused. There's too many books coming out. I compiled it. I made sure there was a timeline. I made sure there was an index in the back to explain certain things. But all I did was beautifully digitize these letters, 47 different letters. And so when you look at it, you can see their handwriting. You can feel you're in their world, and nobody else is listening. Just them talking to one another. And so I feel funny even being called an author, because I really didn't author this. Editor. Yeah. I've done the editing process a couple of times, and I'll be writing. You know, it's funny, I told Larry on the way home yesterday, I love being in this Writers' Festival area. You know, when you come here, there's something so alive about it, and I realize how much I like writing, and I love performing. I do. I love singing. I love doing acting things once in a while, but I may spend a hell of a lot more time just writing and dealing with written word, and because I love the research process, like you do. You know, that's the fun, digging down and finding out all those. But you're a natural-born
storyteller. You're a very good storyteller, and you know how the rhythms of a story work. And one of the great things about this book is what Lucy said, the physical reproduction of the letters. And your dad had easy-to-read handwriting, but your mother had really beautiful penmanship and very, very clear.
And big.
Big.
She's the same amount that he would say would take her 11 pages to write it.
And you know, there's an intensity of the letters because of wartime separation. Desi was stationed stateside in the San Fernando Valley, so they were really only probably, like most of the time, about 25 miles apart at most. Yeah. But they didn't see each other very often. And in fact, in the middle of World War II, your mother divorced your dad the first time, or started to divorce him, because she was upset that he was playing around maybe with starlets when he was entertaining the troops. And but on the night before the divorce decree was supposed to go through in court, he called and said, "What are you doing for dinner?" And they got together and had dinner, and wound up in more than dinner. And
what happened?
Well,
I'm still confused, a little vague, actually.
So she got out of bed the next morning. In real life, they didn't have to sleep in twin beds. And she got out of bed the next morning and he said, "Where are you going?" She said, "I bought a new suit. I'm going to divorce you." And so she went to the courthouse and came home and got back in bed and invalidated the decree. So
she said, "I don't want to disappoint the press. They're all there waiting for me. I have to go down and divorce you."
And then they ultimately repeated their vows in a Catholic church because Desi's mother particularly had felt that they hadn't had children because they weren't married in the church. So they got married in the church, and here's the result.
Ta-da!
As they say in the Episcopal Church, an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. You know.
I want to make sure people leave here understanding Desi's contribution, right? I mean, Lucy, we know, and I want to talk about Lucy at running Desilu too. I want to talk about the things that people don't know from watching and loving the show. Why did you call your book The Man Who Invented Television? What did he didn't actually invent the technology of television, so what did you mean by that?
Well, I stole the line from an NPR Planet Money episode, but it's not hyperbole, really, in the sense that what happened was in the late 1940s, in the last days of network radio, Lucy had a radio sitcom called My Favorite Husband. And as television was coming on strong, CBS wanted her to transfer the show to TV. And because she and Desi had spent so much of the 1940s separated, either by the war or when he was on the road with his band, they really wanted to work together, live together, have a family, have a baby. So she said, I don't want to do television unless Desi can be my co-star. And since the plot of My Favorite Husband, the husband was the 5th vice president of a bank, played by the blonde, waspy Richard Denning, Desi realized he couldn't play that role, but they came up with another concept. But CBS was very reluctant. They said, nobody will believe you're married to this crazy accented guy, all-American girl like you. And he's like, we have been married for 10 years, 11 years. So he went around the suits, and he came up with the idea to take a vaudeville tour of movie theaters around the country. He took his band. Lucy did comedy. They were a smash hit. The trade papers and the papers gave them great reviews. So CBS and a single sponsor, Philip Morris, decided to take a chance. There was one advertising man named Milton Beo who represented Philip Morris. He's the grandfather of Matthew Broderick. And he said, we'll take a chance on this. But there was so much skepticism from CBS about Desi that they said Ricky Ricardo could only sing if it was absolutely essential to the plot. And after it became the #1 show on television, that clause disappeared pretty quickly. But what happened was CBS said, when are you moving to New York? Because that's where television was produced. It was a sponsor-driven medium. And they said, no, we want to stay here in Los Angeles. And because there was no coaxial cable, you couldn't transmit a television signal all across the country. And there was no videotape. So the only way to preserve a television program was to film off a TV monitor screen a 16-millimeter film called a kinescope, which was like looking through cheesecloth. And 2/3 of the country, from Chicago to New York, was where the audience was. And CBS said, we're not going to let you do this in Los Angeles and have a kinescope seen in the rest of the country because it had to be shipped and a week later. So the idea, what if we film it? CBS said, that'll cost more. And because Lucy and Desi were in the 90% tax bracket, they realized that after tax, that wouldn't be a big penalty. And Desi said, okay, but then I want to own the negative. Oh. And that was the foundation of the Desilu empire. So they agreed to...
How did he know that?
What?
How did he know that?
He doesn't even sure, right? He wasn't even... He thought maybe foreign rights or...
No, I'm sure he didn't even think about that. He was like, I give you something, you'll give me something. I don't think he thought that deeply about it. He was like, if I'm going to give you, another $1,000 of our salary, then what are you going to give me? And he just thought, he said, well, then let us own the film. My mother said they never thought it was worth anything.
Right.
They thought, if anything, we'll get a year of this and there'll be great home movies to show our children someday. Yeah, and so they went, yeah, fine, that's right. Because there wasn't any syndication in those.
Right.
There weren't any reruns yet. And CBS, I don't think, understood there was any value to it anyway. So my father was just trying to get something for something, and turned out to be pretty smart.
Yeah, so that became the foundation of a television empire that ultimately was the landlord or producer for Danny Thomas, Dick Van Dyke, Andy Griffith, Eve Arden and R. Miss Brooks, and so on, and it became, by the end of the 1950s, the largest producer of television in the world.
And it prompted a series of enormous technical challenges that were resolved by was it Carl Freund?
Yep. Carl Freund.
Yeah.
Just, you know what? The best thing was that my father was never afraid to ask questions. And when somebody would say, no, can't do that, he'd say, politely, he'd say, excuse me, why not? Because you can't. They're not allowed. You can't do that here. And he goes, but why? And then they'd have to explain, because the fire department will come in, and then they can't go. So he'd think, okay, well, let me get the fire department on the phone. Let's see if we can. It's like somebody says, I want to fly to the moon.
Right.
And they went, right.
Yeah.
And somebody else figured out how to do it, right? And he just wouldn't take no for an answer. And he knew my mother had to work in front of a live audience. She works better in front of a live audience. Who doesn't? And they wanted to film it on film so that they wouldn't have to do coaxial cable and they could stay in Los Angeles and get New York the good quality. And, and it had to be 3 cameras because she wants it to like a play, like it could not stop and start because the audience would get bored with that. And so it has to be live audience, 3-camera film. How are we going to do that?
Right.
And they figured it out. And then they figured out how to find a studio that they could do it in. I mean, his book, which comes out again next month, is so brilliant. The chapter is about how they put this show together, piece by piece by piece by piece. It's brilliant.
That's really the heart of Desi's memoir. And they had to figure out how to turn a motion picture soundstage, which is a working factory floor, into an auditorium. They built bleachers. Your grandmothers were there for every show. You eventually were there. You and your brother were there for the filmings in later years.
They got it all figured out, except they got to the very night that they were getting ready to start filming the very first show, and everybody's in costumes, and the band is playing, and they're like 15 minutes away, and the fire marshal comes in and says, "I'm sorry, you cannot do this show. You don't have enough bathrooms."
There's no women's room.
There's no women's bathroom. There's one bathroom where, but you have to have bathrooms for women and men. You got to have enough people. Oh, what the hell? I'm sorry, you can't do the show. So my mother said, "Tell them they can use my room, for God's sakes," And so all the women in the audience were using my mother's dressing room bathroom until they solved that and built another bathroom. But,
One of my favorite stories in all of Lucy is the communist story.
Yeah.
Will you tell that episode? It's so moving. It's so moving to me.
Oh, well, it's a long story.
It's a long story. Well, buy the book, and then you can.
Yeah,
read
I mean,
it.
it's a lot, and the one thing that the Aaron Sorkin movie, Being the Ricardos, did get brilliantly right was how that all came down. When she was accused of being a communist because she signed up and checked Communist Party when she was 21 years old, and that was like checking Green Party back then. It wasn't such a thing. And her father was he loved the common man and the working man, and so when it was, she didn't even want to vote. You have to vote. He said, you have to vote, and you have to go down, and you have to vote. You have to check communist. It's a communist party. It's the only party you can vote. Oh, fine.
This is 1933.
So to please him, that's what she and her brother did. And they never vote. She never voted. She used to tell me for years, you don't vote, don't vote. My father said she didn't know who the mayor of Los Angeles was. She didn't care about politics. But when they were famous, 3 years into the show, somebody dug up a card that said when she had registered, only it said canceled. But they took that off and printed it in the paper, and Walter Winchell broke this story, and it practically ruined her career, his career, the show, everything.
It was the height of the blacklist. It could have completely ruined the show.
It could have completely ruined everything, but my
infancy.
father fought back, and that story is absolutely brilliant, too, in the book, if you haven't seen the Aaron Sorkin film. But it could have ruined everything, and it was based on absolutely nothing. It was a complete falsity, They don't do that anymore in politics.
And
No.
And
I'm glad you cleared that up.
The night this all broke in the papers, they were filming the first episode of the 3rd season of I Love Lucy, and Lucy was terribly afraid that the audience might reject her because it had been in the papers that morning. And Desi goes out. He'd already called J. Edgar Hoover. He got the congressman from the House Un-American Activities Committee to hold a press conference saying, this is all not a problem. And he went out and he said, and now I want you to meet my wife, the mother of my children. Red is the only thing about her that's red is her hair, and even that's not legitimate. And it disappeared. And it was actually one of those little chinks in the armor that over the years helped. It didn't happen right away, but it helped make people realize how stupid the blacklist was and how people could get caught up in this net.
She was lucky. She was just lucky. Could have destroyed everything. Yeah.
Did your dad feel in his lifetime that he got the credit for what he did?
You'd have to ask him. I don't know.
We can ask Todd.
Well, Todd, what do you think?
I think he must have felt I think he knew that the people in the business, many people in the business knew what he'd done. I think maybe he probably worried that the broader public might not understand. I don't know. But he wasn't the guy he didn't spend a lot of, you tell me, but I don't think he spent a lot of time looking backward, really.
He didn't spend a lot of time looking for credit. He just did the job. I don't think it was important to him for quite a while, but then I think it does start to get on your nerves, when they pull your car up or you give the valet your car and they go, Mr. Ball's car, please.
Right.
That hurts. And you get enough years of that, and it's I Love Lucy, and everybody remembers Lucy, and he wanted it to be that way. The show was called I Love Lucy, and she was the main event. That's why the show was written. It was written around her talent. He never begrudged her fame. I think it ate away at him that, interestingly enough, in the back of the new book, when they republish it, they asked me if I could find some new material so that it would just sort of like, oh, new, expanded version. So I did. I went through all those boxes you went through and tried to decipher the handwriting on ideas that he had that I didn't think meant anything, but now I'm looking at them differently. And there were a lot of interesting points of view and ideas he had for new television series or traveling with his band, and all these things he was going to do. Even when he had Desi Arnaz Productions, he did several pilots, and he had one show, Mothers-in-Law, that lasted 2 years. All the others failed. So he couldn't get the car started again. I Love Lucy was a limousine, and he couldn't get another car started that was half as nice as a big old, And I think that ate away at him. It wasn't that he wasn't a star. It was that they don't want to listen to me anymore. My ideas aren't good anymore. I'm not able to produce, and they're passing me by. But then he made sure that kind of happened too, because he lived in Del Mar. He didn't really kowtow to Hollywood. He didn't have a press agent. He didn't play the game. And then he drank. So little by little by little, he worked his way out of the business. And so I don't think he could be too upset that he didn't get the credit. And when he died, suddenly everybody was remembering and finding in the great articles that came out on the week he died, I kept saying, I hope you're reading this, But I think that was the reason.
You're so balanced about it's so nice. I'm listening as a Desi fan and as a biographer, thinking how nice it is, and imagining the two of you working together, that the keeper of this material actually has an integrated and loving but real view of these people. Go ahead, yeah.
Well, it's such an important thing to me personally, and as a biographer, that Lucy never tried to exert any control, and it was clear to me from the beginning that she is a loving and really wonderful steward of her parents' legacies, but she's very clear-eyed about it. She's not under any illusions about their strengths, nor about their failings as people, as parents, as creators, as human beings. And so I don't think too many biographers get to deal with a family member who is like that and who is willing to, let the truth be told, because the truth is good, and it's painful for both of her parents, but it's flattering to both of them. And Desi, there was a famous story when Lucy tripped on a cable one day in the soundstage, and she was okay, but Desi said, "Amigos, anything happens to her, we're all in the shrimp business." So,
No, but I didn't collaborate with Todd.
Oh, yes, you did.
Well, I was available when you needed something asked or to see. I collaborated with you by opening up whatever you needed, but it wasn't like we were writing this book together or he owed me anything or I didn't get the final approval, nothing. I just trusted you and you did the perfect job. I didn't want to collaborate. I was thrilled to death that somebody else was going to take on the interesting dichotomy of what Desi Arnaz was. My mother was pretty weirdly interesting too, and nobody's really kind of gotten into what that's all about. But they've certainly never really tried to tell the Desi Arnaz story. And my daughter and I were thinking about making a film about it, because I think his story all the way back to Cuba, which you really concentrated on too, which was great.
I was able to go to Cuba, which was wonderful, and
the backstory is everything.
See the house where he was born and the island where his family had a
Will
summer
you let
house
people know what kind of world Desi came from?
He grew up with every possible privilege. I mean, a house in town, a summer house on this little island in Santiago Harbor. Santiago is like a combination of San Francisco and New Orleans. It's the cradle of Cuban music in this beautiful hillside port in the southeastern corner of the island. It's right around the corner from where Teddy Roosevelt charged up Kettle Hill and San Juan Hill in the Spanish-American War, and it had everything to do with making Desi what he was. His father was the mayor of the town. His mother's father was an executive at the Bacardi Rum Company. And then the family lost everything in the overthrow of the Machado regime in 1933 and came to Florida with penniless, pretty much. And so I think one of the things about the latter part of his career, Desi always felt he had made his own luck. He invented himself.
Absolutely.
And I think he always felt he could reinvent himself. But by the end of his life and the end of his career, he had just gambled wrong one time to many, and he had also undermined his standing in Hollywood by his drinking, by his unreliability. People felt they couldn't count on him anymore. So his attempts, final attempts at a comeback, he'd thrown the dice one time too many, and it didn't work anymore.
Also, it's like a lot of us can lose money, and you come back, okay, I gotta go make money again. But the way he lost everything, right? The revolution, they came in because his father was in the government. They destroyed his farms. They slaughtered the animals. They killed the pets. They set his house on fire. They threw the piano in the lawn. They broke his guitar in half. They burned all the family photos. And he remembers this. He was 16 and a half years old. And his mother, oh my God, till the day she died, she lived to be 92 years old, and she had Alzheimer's at the end, and she was still screaming out in the middle of the day, "Mi casa!" like that. She was still screaming that, but that was the one memory. And so he had to have serious PTSD from that kind of loss, and nobody ever addressed it. You just had to go on, and you went to Miami, and you got a job cleaning bird cages, and then you played guitar, and somebody hired you in a band, and life went on. Except it never goes away, and so no matter how much money they made, no matter how great things got, he still had that terror in his brain. He took care of his mother till the day he died. Because they took care till the day she died, till the day he died.
You took care of it till the day she died.
And then I took care of it the next couple of years. But it was a traumatic situation. And my mother had trauma too, but not so bad. It was things you could understand a little bit better, but it was hard. So you look at people and what they go through, and to understand people that you can't comprehend why they behave the way they do. There's stuff there, and it's fascinating.
I wonder if Desi, you say mi casa, I wonder if that's how Desi spent his life, is rebuilding that casa.
Oh, there's a story. Got to go in my book. I don't have time to tell the whole thing.
All right.
No,
But
because it was about, you want your parents' approval, don't you? You want your mom or your dad to both tell you done good. And he did do good, right?
Yeah.
His father hardly ever said that. He was pissed off he wasn't the mayor anymore. He wasn't as successful as his son. He kept it kind of low brow, but he was not a happy camper, and he didn't hardly ever come to visit us. It was very strange. And his mother, no matter what he did, the rest of his life was never good enough. She never gave him credit. She would be talking to her friends, my son is Desi Arnaz, but to him, she wouldn't tell him. And so he just kept trying and trying, and then after you quit trying, you just say, I'll have another. Right? Why wouldn't you?
Yeah. I'm just finishing up Frank Capra now, and that's exactly his mother.
There you go.
Exactly his
And
mother.
sometimes, those things are helpful. I forget who wrote that book about that. Don Buford, remember he gave us that book about the fellow who wrote about how people whose mothers were like that very often create incredibly successful sons and daughters, just to prove them wrong.
Johnny Carson's mother was like that. When he got on the cover of Time magazine, she's like, when Norman Lear's mother, when he called to tell her that he was in the inaugural class at the Television Academy Hall of Fame with your mother, with the widow of Edward R. Murrow, General David Sarnoff, William S. Paley. Right. Mrs. Lear said, well, if they want to do something like that, who am I to argue? And, that creates a pretty big drive, I would say.
Absolutely, absolutely. But leaves a hole that you would hope gets healed with that success or with love. And what do you? We know Desi didn't really figure that out, but did your mom? No, I don't think so. I think she had it easier, but she just played it out differently. She pulled up more of a wall in her life for things, not to be hurt with pain like that again. Very painful childhood. And you don't want to get hurt, so different people work with it in different ways. And neither one of them ever had any therapy. We have therapists now. We have Oprah. We had Dr. Phil. We have TV shows telling us how to get better. But she had nothing. They had nothing. And if you went to get help, right? Yep. In the 40s or the 50s,
would be a scandal.
That would be the worst possible thing. Luella Parsons or Hedda Hopper would write about it, and then you'd be gone.
The closest they came to getting therapy, though, they did consult with the Reverend Norman Vincent Peale, the minister who wrote The Power of Positive Thinking and married Donald and Ivana Trump, actually. But he had a partner named a psychiatrist who had been analyzed by Freud himself. And this guy's name was Smiley Blanton.
Smiley Blanton,
MD.
Dr. Smiley Blanton.
And they went to have a few couples counseling sessions with him. And there are some letters that Lucy has in her files that share this back and forth. And one of the things, they gave a Rorschach test to Desi, and they're analyzing it and saying that basically he has some other issues and kind of complicated feelings about this. And the other thing that I think they would have sort of said, that he had almost an imposter syndrome, that the more successful he became, the less valid it felt to him, the less deserving he felt of it. And so he kept chasing the ring. And then ultimately they didn't continue the therapy, and Desi bought the rights to a book by Dr. Blanton's wife about Bernadette of Lourdes, and your mother accused him of, making a deal out of their attempt to have therapy together. And so it
Shouldn't be a total loss. Must be something good here I can do. Yeah, he tried, but it was very, he used to say, we don't air our dirty laundry in public. It's a Latin thing. It is a Latin thing, and it was a humiliation thing. But, to his credit, in the last year of his life, after his beautiful wife, Edie, his second wife, who we all loved, they were married 27 years, and my mother married Gary for 27. It's amazing. And my mom and dad were only married 19 and a half years. But they never stopped really caring the most for each other. But now, of course, I drift off like that. I forgot what I was going to tell you about Edie.
Oh, that he got sober in the end.
Oh, he got sober, yeah. And so Edie passed away. And my brother, he called my brother and he said, I need help. He was really on death's row. He was down. And he did. He took scripts and he went into Family Week, and I was there, and I was able to witness him standing up in a group like this and saying, my name is Desi, and I'm an alcoholic. Proudest moment of my life, to see him acknowledge that. And unfortunately, as soon as he got out of the treatment center and they gave him his little marble to remember one day at a time and all that, he found out he had lung cancer. And then the pain, then there was pain medication, and he never took another drink, which was great. But he only lasted a year. So, but I'm still just thinking, you did it. You still did it.
Well,
doesn't matter.
The thing that comes through so often in his life is, yes, he had this macho Latin affect, and he wasn't going to air his dirty, but his tenderness and his soft-heartedness comes through all the time. And when you mention Edie, his second wife, she brought to the marriage her own son, Greg Hirsch, who was at the time about 9 years old. And he told me this wonderful story about what it was like to have Desi as a stepfather. And they went deep-sea fishing once with Lucy and her brother.
Deep-sea fishing.
Yeah, sorry, deep-sea fishing. What did I say?
No, you said deep, but Dad would say dipsy fishing.
Oh, dipsea fishing.
We're going to go dipsy fishing.
Dipsea fishing. And Lucy caught a marlin or a sailfish, and he raised a blue flag on the boat. And Desi Jr. caught a whatever it was, sailfish, and they raised a red flag on the boat. And then Greg caught a 100-pound wahoo, which is a member of the tuna family. It was so heavy it broke the rod. Desi helped him reel it in, but there was no flag to mark that fish.
They don't have wahoo flags.
So Greg began to cry, and Desi told Edie to go below and take off her bra. And he raised the bra on the flagpole and said, now, when we go in, they're going to see, you should do the accent, but they're going to see the red flag for the marlin and the blue flag for the sailfish, and they're going to see the brassiere, and they're going to go, wahoo! And that's your fish. So, who couldn't love a person like that?
She had nice tits.
That's the line to go out on.
Oh,
I mean, but we still have 2 minutes. But in 2 minutes, I want you to pay tribute to your mother's running Desi Lou. And yes.
Well, I wish I could do that. The best thing I can say is that she gave it, all she had, but she never wanted that job. It was like, you're the vice president and the president's assassinated. Oh, my God, and here I am now, blah. But even a vice president dreams that someday they might be that person. My mother did not want to run the studio at all. She just wanted to play in the sandbox and be Lucy. And then the marriage, fell apart, and she had to buy him out, and suddenly she's sitting in the room with the suits.
But she did a good job.
Well, she did, because she's a responsible human being, and she did the work that has to be done. Like if you lose a husband in a family, and the mother has to take over paying the bills and looking out for the car and doing you don't want to do that. You're sort of nice if somebody else does it. But she was smart, And the best, she made great decisions, like
Including
they came out, like the first year, this is too much money, and the budget is too thin. We have to cut a bunch of pilots. We can't have this. And 2 of them were Mission Impossible and Star Trek. And she said, "Oh, I don't know. Gary was my stepfather. Gary really likes Star Trek, and he likes Mission Impossible. I don't think we should cancel those." So they didn't.
But that is how you run a studio.
I guess
She was correct. She didn't know it.
She followed her instincts.
Exactly.
Her instincts were very good, and I think Gary Morton should get more credit than he usually gets.
That's interesting.
He made that decision, basically.
That is really well.
Isn't that funny? That's funny. It's true.
I love that, and that's in your Todd's book. But I love this story. In fact, because we come through a time where people are talking about what a horrible place Hollywood is for women and people who are not American and born in America. And this story of Lucy and Desi really shows that Hollywood was created by everyone, and
that's right.
They made it up as they went along. Immigrants
They get the job
Thank you
done.
very much.
Immigrants is the word. Yes, and that is the story of the creation of Hollywood, and it's one of the reasons I always come back to it, because I really see it as an American, the best
thing about these 2 books, too, his book and this thing, is that right now what we need is hope and love. And that's what both of them actually, you come away from reading his book and this book, and you feel a little more positive, a little more optimistic that there's a way through when you focus on the right things and not the wrong things, I think. Oh, right.
Thank you,
0,
guys.
0, 0.
Todd and
Nailed
Lucy.
it. Nailed it. Very good.
Todd,
Nailed the
great.
time. Good.
Thank you, guys.
Ladies and gentlemen, the program will begin in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and silence all cell phones. The program is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Desi Goodwin with Julia Whalen.
Woo! So much verve, so much energy.
Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
I hope the festival has been incredible for you. It has been for us. There's been entirely too much socializing and all those good things. I'm going to kick us off by making Daisy sit here while I read her bio to you. Because it's, okay, Daisy Goodwin is a writer and television producer. After reading history at Cambridge, she went to Columbia Film School as a Harkness Fellow. After 10 years at the BBC making arts documentaries, she left to join the independent sector and created a number of shows, including Grand Designs. In 2005, she started Silver River Productions, which she sold to Sony in 2012. Alongside her TV work, Daisy has written 4 novels, including Diva, The American Heiress, The Fortune Hunter, and Victoria, all of which were New York Times bestsellers. She is also the creator and screenwriter of the Masterpiece TV, This is America, series Victoria on PBS. My favorite line of this is Daisy lives in London with her 3 dogs, 2 daughters, and 1 husband. So I did this because we're going to get to Victoria, don't worry, but I did this because I want to talk about your history with storytelling. Because I think that bio speaks to a life of finding, constructing, and telling stories. And I want to know if from the beginning you wanted to be a storyteller, how you thought that would manifest, and if you ended up being right.
That's a great question. I think it probably started because from a very early age, I had a very sort of, how can I put it, liminal relationship with the truth. So I was, I think you could say I started fibbing at an early age. And
just kept going.
And I would actually construct very elaborate fantasy lives for myself. I was quite a sort of, I wasn't the most popular child. And so I would say, well, you know, of course, I've got a friend. I used to tell people at school that my mother had an affair with Fidel Castro.
News to your mother, I presume.
Yes. And they all believe me. And then I'd go a little bit further and I'd say that, you know, my mother was born in China and she was in fact Chinese, and my father was born in India and he was in fact Indian. And again, everybody just took that totally, you know, they were like, oh, well, you don't look right. But, okay. And so I just, you know, and I quite enjoyed that. And then, of course, at the age of sort of 13, when everybody else had boyfriends, I didn't. I didn't know any boys, so I just made one up. I had this very, very, very attractive young man called Jay, who lived in North London, and we used to go out on his motorbike, and it was all a complete fantasy. And I don't know whether anybody knew it was a fantasy or not. Anyway, so, and then I applied this talent for fiction to pretty much everything I did after that. My CVs, well, no. My CVs were absolutely accurate, but I was very good in an interview, you know. People believed me. I was very good at sort of putting across this hardworking, industrious person who, you know, could never tell a lie, but little did they know. And I went to all these fancy schools, and then I ended up, you know, going to the BBC. And the first thing I was sent to cover to make a little film about was about greyhound thefts in Dorset, and
it's a problem.
It's a huge problem, and you know there aren't many greyhounds left now because they've all been stolen. And so I just kind of made it a bit more of a story, and luckily nobody noticed. But you know, I sort of realised this is probably where I should be, a place where I can, you know, as my daughters say, "Oh, Mom, that's not how it happened. You're just turning it into one of your stories," you know, and that's kind of where I started. So don't believe a word I say.
Were you kind of on parallel tracks, writing for or developing television while also writing novels, or which came first?
I was one of those people who was like, I'm in an institution, and then I'm going to go to another. So I went to Cambridge University, then I went to Columbia University, then I went to the BBC, and I was like, yes, I've achieved all these things, and I'm sort of in a framework. And then when I was at the age of 27, and I thought I was kind of a, you know, a kind of straight A gold star person. And then at the age of 27, I got fired from the BBC, which is quite hard, I can tell you. Not many people get let go by the BBC. And I was like, what, me? But I'm so great. And I've got this great talent for telling stories and whatever. And yeah, I was let go. And I was at sort of at a very low ebb. And I was sitting in a Malaysian restaurant, and the manager came up to me and said, you know, I think would you like to come and work here? You'd be a really good server. And I thought, okay, I've got to kind of get a grip here. I need to kind of, anyway, so at that point, I thought, I've got to narrate the story of my own life. I'm not going to be, allow myself to be shaped by institutions. So I went freelance, and suddenly it all got a lot better. And my life, I made a story about Radio Free Europe, and I got a sort of whole bunch of people to say that it was a kind of, funnily enough, a place pumping propaganda into wherever it was, and it became a thing, and I started to pick up, a freelance career, and then, of course, the BBC hired me back. So that was good. So I was like, hooray. and then I got into what I can only call, forgive me, property porn, which is basically, you know, I love looking at other people's houses. That's pretty much all I like doing. I mean, you know, what's not to like? And I made a number of shows, and you'll get the drift. One's called The House Doctor, and that was with a wonderful Californian woman called Anne Michelle, who came over, and she's Californian. You know, you all have beautiful, clean, tidy homes, and she would go into these really scuzzy, really disgusting homes in Britain that wouldn't sell. And I remember one moment where she's opening the door, and there's this woman saying, no, I haven't been able to sell my house for 5 years. And she goes, and where are your dogs? And the woman goes, oh, they're in the back. And she said, yes, but how do I know that you have dogs? And it takes the woman about 2 minutes to realize what Anne is saying, but basically that our house stinks. And so I'm afraid, don't come to England. Don't come and buy a house in England. You'd be very disappointed. It's not a good thing. Anyway, so I introduced the concept of house staging to England with this woman, and it went down frightfully well, and it had 400 series. And then I made Grand Designs, which is about people building their own houses, which, if you haven't seen it, you can watch it on BritBox. And it's hilarious because, and it's a natural storytelling format, because I would find real people who really were building their own houses. And the point about people who build their own houses, in England, I'm sure it's different here, is that they are by definition insane. And as we know, insane people make great TV subjects. I mean, when I say they're insane, but, you know, and so halfway through the project, they would either be living in a caravan, they'd get divorced, they'd run out of money. I mean, it was just so TV good. Heaven. So and then you get, and then by the end of it, you'd have this fabulous house. So it was a perfect story. It would be a sort of, you know, there would always be a happy ending. And if there wasn't a happy ending, I would make one. Because I would, you know, there'd be this shell of a house, and we'd just put a few plants and a sofa. It would look fabulous. Yeah, ta-da! Anyway, that's the magic of story. That's the magic of television. Anyway.
And at some point, you decided it was time to write a book.
Okay, yeah, sorry. I'll get back to my writing career.
I'd love to. Can we do another session next year that's just like...
Property porn.
Yes.
Property porn, yeah.
With Desi and
I'll just go my other titles, Property Ladder, Escape to the Country.
Escape to the Country is also amazing.
Yeah, if you really want to go to sleep at night, and you're, you know, and you can't just get off. I was talking to a writer, and he said, "You did Escape to the Country? That's what my wife and I..."
That's what turns my brain off.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I was like, thank you so much. Yes. Anyway, back to novels. So I read history at Cambridge, and I love the past. I'm fascinated by it, and I'm fascinated by the women of the past. I want to put flesh on them, as it were, and I want to know how they felt and how they operated in this world that's so much more prescribed than our own. And I went to visit Blenheim Palace when I was about 45, and I saw this picture of Consuelo Vanderbilt, and she's here, and the Duke is there, and their children between, and I thought, that doesn't look like the world's happiest marriage. And then I started reading about her, and I she became the inspiration for my first book, which is called The American Heiress, which is about, someone called Cora Cash, richest girl in the world, and she comes to England and, there's a duke and whatever. And it's great fun, and I'm currently adapting it for television.
Oh, good.
So, woo, fingers crossed.
That's
All pray
great.
for me, guys, because I get the green light in 2 weeks. So, and if it works, it'll be on screen next year. So,
Amazing.
Fingers crossed.
Incredible. Yes. So were you writing narratively for, were you writing original concepts yet for television, or were you still doing reality for television?
Well, when you say original concepts, I mean, I would come up...
Or scripted, I should say.
Well, I used to come up with ideas like, let's do something called the Sex Inspectors. Okay. If there's anybody under 18 in here, please, just put your hands over your ears. So basically, it was a show where we would go, and I used to do makeover programs, and this was a sort of, people who were having problems with their marital relations, always married, obviously, and we would. We would film them with. No, it's okay. We would film them with thermal cameras, so you don't see anything. You just see heat masses, and we'd have two people, an amazing sexologist who's called Tracy Cox, and it took you a while, didn't it? Yeah, it took you a while.
Born to the job.
Yeah, Tracy Cox and another guy, and they would watch this, and then they would go to the couple afterwards and suggest ways that they might make their time in the bedroom slightly more interesting. And, there were feathers, I won't go into any more detail.
Is this also on BritBox, just if people are curious?
Yeah, I think it might, I think it might well be. Anyway, I sold it as an educational program, but I can tell you it was very, very hard to get people to be on it because, for obvious reasons, you never saw any naked flesh, I promise you. I mean, now on English television there are much worse shows. Honestly. But then, it seemed quite risque, and we never showed any naked flesh. But it was quite hard to get people to be on it because obviously the only people who want to be on a show like that are, people who might want to...
Or building a house, let's say.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we would send... I remember standing in shopping malls, and I'd target the women with the prams or the strollers with the small babies, and then you'd sort of stroll up and go, how are you doing? How is your sex life? And funnily enough, it wasn't that great, and it's amazing.
What's interesting, though, about this is, because you're clearly so interested in reality and what is happening to people. And so what made you decide to start fictionalizing it?
Because the heaven of not having to deal with other people. Oh, my God.
That is fair.
The heaven of just being alone in my study, reading all these books, and that thing, I never thought, when I'd interviewed a lot of writers when I was making arts documentaries, and they'd say, the characters take over, and I go, yeah, right. But then the most amazing thing happens. I started to write a novel, and I had no idea how to do it. I'd never been to a creative writing class. I wasn't sort of prepped in that way. It just came. It was extraordinary. The characters did start doing their own thing. And it was the most, and for my first novel, I'd kind of got a structure mapped out. And then when I started to write it, I realized that wasn't going to work because the characters were going and often doing completely different things. And my wonderful American editor, who was a woman called Hope Dunnan, who's now sadly dead, but she read this and she loved the book, but she said, Desi, the ending is all wrong. And she said, I love the book because it's like Henry James without the boring bits, but you've given it this ridiculous Wuthering Heights ending. And so, and I thought, oh yeah, you're right. So I had to rewrite the end. But it was amazing. It was just like, I've got all these people in my head. I didn't realize they were speaking to me. I mean, I'm not actually mad, but,
we're a little mad.
I am slightly strange. But that was such a wonderful feeling. And the glory of just sitting down, concentrating, and I never know what I'm going to write until I sit down. And when I sit down, it will come to me. It does come to me so long as I sit there. So my technique is always just I set myself a number, 1,000 words, 8 pages, whatever it is, and I don't move until I've done that number. And that's the only way I can do it. I mean, there are a lot of other people who write, they wait for their inspiration, but for me, the only way you get inspiration is if you concentrate, and you only concentrate if you know that you are not going to get a glass of wine until you've finished, until you've done word 1,000, and that's the only way I can do it. So if anybody is thinking to write, that's the way to do it. And the other thing is just to keep going. Do not go back over it. Just get to the end, and then you can edit it.
Yep, you can't edit a blank page.
No.
So, given your background, when you have a story idea or a character or something comes to you that's compelling, are you thinking about it visually? Are you thinking about it cinematically? Or are you thinking about a book?
Oh, it's such a good question, because I think I love dialogue, so I listen to people, and I'm always listening to people and sort of, hearing how they talk, and I try and do that in my work. And so I find writing dialogue the easiest thing. But I also know that as I write, I'm always picturing where they are. And so when I'm writing about Victoria or the Empress Sisi, I will, if I can, go to the places they've been to. So, and when I wrote about Cora Cash, I went to Newport, so I could just imagine the scale of where she was living, in one of those mansions. Cottages. What am I saying? They're called cottages. And I think as I write, I'm imagining the landscape. Yes, so I think visually, but I also have an ear for dialogue. So it's a bit of both, but now I'm adapting my own work. I think, this is handy, because, I know where everything is set, and I know what I want it to look like. And I'm going to drive the set and costume designers insane, because I know more about it than they do.
Right, that's your prerogative, though.
Yeah.
So that's great, because this brings us to Victoria.
Yeah.
In the author's note, at the end of the book, you write about your first real brush with thinking about Queen Victoria as a whole person, not just as a stock historical figure. I kind of want you to read this, or I'll read it, but this is just for context for people.
Is this about the quote about?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, actually, I can remember it. So I'm 19 years old. I'm sitting in the University Library in Cambridge, which is a very hallowed and silent place. And I have a stack of Queen Victoria's diaries like this. In her lifetime, she wrote 62 million words. And she kept diaries throughout her life. Anyway, I'm looking, and I'm thinking, oh my God, Queen Victoria's diaries. Anyway, I get to, sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but anyway.
It's so good.
I open it up, and we're at, whenever it is, December 1839, and she's just met Albert, and they've just got engaged. And she is hot to trot. And she writes about, we went to inspect the troops at the parade, and Albert looked so fine in his blue jacket and his white, tight cashmere breeches. Nothing underneath.
She's 19?
She's 19, and high boots. And I'm like, whoa! And I actually go, whoa, like that, in the university library, and everybody looks around and like, what is going on? There's this mad woman laughing at Queen Victoria's diaries. But that's a sexy quote. She really fancied him, as you can see.
So how long? But that's
They didn't have Y fronts in the 19th century. Just in case you needed context.
But they're in. You're an undergraduate at this point.
Yeah.
But this clearly plants some kind of seed. When did you? Sorry. Sorry, the romance novelist just came out there for a second, and I can usually repress it, and then every once in a while it just comes out. Anyway, when did that bear fruit? Did you decide at a certain point? I'm gonna write about. I'm so sorry, everyone.
Okay. 9 months later, I was.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what happened was, I'm gonna jump in here because Julie,
Save me.
You are in double.
Please go.
You are in double entendre.
I know. I'm so sorry.
Okay. So I sold my company to Sony. I worked for Sony for about 10 minutes. I did not get on with Sony. Sorry if anybody here works for Sony, but corporate culture is not my thing.
Nope.
Anyway, so I left and I was like, well, what on earth am I going to do now? And I had, at that time, a very small, very spirited, I think is the word, teenage daughter called Lydia, who's about this high, 5 foot, exactly the same height as Queen Victoria. And we had a massive row one morning, as you do, and I suddenly thought of Queen Victoria, and I suddenly thought, yeah, she was 18, and so was Lydia. And then I thought, gosh, what would it like if this, monstrous, hormonal kind of rage-filled child suddenly became the most powerful woman in the world? Plus, what would it be like for her mother? And, from that point on, I knew that's the story I have to tell, because, everybody thinks of Queen Victoria as being, the old lady in the photographs wearing black, looking like a sort of a codfish, and, with the jowls and whatever. But actually, her reign started, she was 18 years old. And the fact that absolutely made me laugh my head, I loved Victoria from the moment. There's the tight white, tighty whitey breeches, nothing underneath. But the bit that I really loved was when she writes in her diary that after the Archbishop of Canterbury had come and said, hello, you're queen.
Guess you're queen now.
Yeah, it's your turn now. The first thing she does is to send everybody away. Her mother, her governess, everybody. They're sent, and she spends an hour completely alone. And that is so significant because it's the first time ever in her life that she's been alone. And that's extraordinary. And I've just written a play about Queen Victoria, and not that I'm working this. But anyway, if anyone's in England in April, my play is called Queen Victoria. Victoria, a Queen Unbound. So if you want to come and see it, you should. I mean, it's Unbound is it's a different take. Anyway, it's not BDSM, don't worry. But it's and I say it's like for her. I have the character say it's like swimming in cream. Because it was just that moment she realizes, I don't have to answer to anyone ever again.
Anything they have to answer to me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that was a real moment for her. And in terms of visuals, when I started writing about Victoria, because she was so little and because I had this sort of physical sense of what that was like with my daughter, who's 5 foot, I sort of imagined her as this little person looking up at all these kind of white-bearded old men telling her what to do. And I just thought it's like being in a forest, literally, of the patriarchy, Mm-hmm. And I was so entranced by that image. And from that point on, I just sort of knew who Victoria was and how I was going to write her. And, I really immersed myself in her diaries. And I tried to make her sort of relatable. I mean, not relatable, but I tried to make her real. Because, the problem with queens, they're always noble, or they're this, or they're that. But I wanted to make her both a queen who knows who she is and owns her power, but also, a teenager who just wants to kind of hang around with her dog and get off with her fiancé. But before the fiancé, there was the Tsarevich. She was very keen on the Tsarevich.
Yeah.
There was a lot. She liked men, and before anybody, there was Lord Melbourne, who she was absolutely besotted by. She had the biggest...
Now I'm going to jump to this question then, because since you brought him up, let's talk about Melbourne. And how did you find... I mean, you take some license. I don't think she actually proposed to Melbourne. We don't know.
No, I don't think she
did. We don't think so. But there was definitely a fascination there and also a mentorship.
Yeah, I mean...
Did you find that early on, being like, this is actually what's going to anchor the story for you, is this relationship?
Oh, it was just, I knew that she had to, I knew at some point she was going to have to meet Albert, but I was very keen to kind of get this relationship across, because also we had Rufus Sewell playing Melbourne, and it's like, well, hello. And we want to get every drop of Rufus that we can. And... Anyway.
I didn't say that, for the record.
No.
That was her.
And so I had so much fun writing for those two, because Rufus, actually, when you meet him in person, is quite goofy, but on screen, he can do soulful like no one else in the world. And he was so wonderful. And so we, and there is nothing better than a love that cannot be, if you're a writer. That's my idea. I mean, I don't know how many of you have watched, Heated Rivalry. How many people have watched Heated Rivalry? Yeah, okay.
Might not totally be the room for that, but...
Well, okay, good, brave. Heated Rivalry. Anyway, it's a story about two gay hockey players, and there's a lot of whatever in it. But the point is, it's about yearning, and there is nothing better than yearning, for me anyway. When I'm watching TV, I love that. So I really wanted to work that. And it's true, you see it in her diaries. She writes things like, I went for a ride today with Lord M. We talked about flogging, Blue, and I said to him, do you think I'm getting a bit fat, Lord M? And he goes, well, yes, ma'am, I do. And she goes, oh. And he said, well, if you took a bit more exercise and ate a bit less, you could slim down. And she goes, but I get so hungry. And that is literally a quote from her diary. So you can see that there is a woman there. You know, that's not a kind of... Most royal diaries...
Do I look fat in this writing habit?
Yeah, exactly.
You actually, so this also brings up the point of, when you mentioned Rufus, you were writing the book while also developing the series. Can you walk us through the practicalities of...
Well, I can, but I mean, to be honest, I started writing the book, then I sold the idea of a TV series, and then I thought, and then once, I don't know if anybody here has ever written for television, but it's just like full on. I didn't look up for about 4 years. And then we had a summer off, and I just thought, I'm going to write the novel. And also, it gave me a chance to put all the stuff that was cut out of the series. So I just did it both, and it was a really fun thing to do, because, you know, the dialogue was there, and I sort of elaborated whatever. But I so enjoyed doing both, because once you've created a world like that, you don't want to leave it ever. You know, I got very involved in it. That sounds a bit sad, but, you know, you become very attached to your characters, especially when you see them, they're beautiful on screen. And I don't know if anybody's seen the first series of Victoria, you may notice that I have a little, a cameo.
I did not notice, for the record, so please tell us.
Well, you might not recognize me. So, you know, because Hitchcock was in all his movies, so I felt it was time that I had a little, you know, moment. And so I wrote this scene, you know, and it's a sort of ball scene and whatever. And there was one part that was meant to be just a silent walk-on part, but and I thought, well, and they said, oh, well, who should we cast? I said, well, you know, I'm free, and I could do it. And, you know, they don't have to get anyone, you don't have to pay me. And they were like, oh, we don't have to pay you. No, right, okay, you're on. And so I turn up, they put me in a hideous dress and a wig and all this sort of stuff. And then as the day, we get on set, and I'm with the wonderful Peter Bowles, who's playing the Duke of Wellington. And, you know, as the day goes on, my part goes from a non-speaking part to, quite a lot of character development goes on. I keep writing myself lines as the day goes on.
You have a whole backstory now.
So if you want to have a look at Program 7, Episode 7, Series 1, you might just see me. The Duchess of Inverness, so that is my moniker. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And I had a lot of fun doing that. It was exhausting, but it was so much fun.
So you had gone through the first series production?
Yeah, and then I started writing the book.
So a lot of, because that's very interesting in terms of whatever you're getting from the actors or the story development on set, you're able to imbue that into the book.
Yeah, I mean, and there are things that I've put in the book that I had to be cut out of the series, because in my original script I had a whole scene with a lion tamer and a lion and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, it got commissioned and we were about to start shooting, and then someone said to me, you do realize we can never film this scene, don't you? And I went, why? And then they explained why. That, you know, all animals on screen are literally paid about 10 times as much as the actors. I mean, you know, if you want to make a lot of money, no longer because they can do it with CGI, but in the old days, you know, you didn't want to be Judy Garland, you wanted to be Lassie's
Ambler,
because
Wrangler, yeah.
that was where you made the real bucks. I mean, Dash, I mean, I don't know if any of you have seen the series, Dash, that spaniel, he earned more than half the actors in the cast. I mean, it was just incredible. And so the actors all sort of, you know.
I'm sorry, that episode, my husband and I were watching that.
When Dash dies.
Well, with Melbourne, let's not ignore Mel. That is so beautifully constructed, and I mean, I feel like it's always ridiculous to be like, spoiler alert for something historical that actually happened, but spoiler alert, Melbourne dies, but the beautiful way you juxtaposed Dash's death with the bird, it was so gorgeous, and Rufus, he's so brilliant in it, and it really is like a showstopper of an episode.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
I just want to say that everyone needs to go watch that. I want to pivot here to, so I was actually talking to our Lieutenant Governor yesterday. Is she in the room? Because she had wanted to be here, but I think she's abandoned us. Okay.
Well, she likes the show because it's about a 5-foot woman.
She loves the show, and she said to me yesterday, we were talking about it, she specifically said, it is a study in power. Did you have that sense when you were sitting down to write it? Did that come out of it later? I mean, you were saying that you're mostly motivated by this idea of what if this character were the most powerful woman in the world, but do you see that in the structure of it, that everything is a negotiation of power?
Yeah, I suppose I didn't do that consciously, but I suppose, you know, that's what drew me to the subject, really, because it's about a woman placed in a powerful situation, you know, in an all-powerful situation at a time when women don't have power. And how do you negotiate that? Mm-hmm. And how do you negotiate the expectations of womanhood, you know, getting married, having children, all these things, and being decorous and quiet, the angel in the house, with how do you reconcile that with being the most powerful woman in the world? That is a very interesting thing. And also the expectation that she would roll over and do what she was told. And that was, you know, and Victoria was, let's face it, a constitutional monarch. She wasn't an American president. No, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But she was constrained by Parliament. I mean, no, she couldn't do whatever she wanted. She couldn't sort of suddenly say she was going to invade some random country or anything like that. That wasn't allowed. Right. But she had, you know, and the other thing is they hadn't had a queen on the throne since Queen Anne, which was beyond living memory. So for 150 years they'd had kings, and suddenly they have this queen, and she's 18 years old. And there were all these rumors before she came to the throne that she was, you know, a dwarf, that she was, you know, in some way, you know, not all there in the head, that she was...
She'd been totally squirreled away.
She'd grown up in Kensington Palace, and literally there was something called the Kensington system, which was designed to break her spirit. So she wasn't even allowed to walk down the stairs without somebody holding her hand. And that's what I mean about her never being alone. She had to sleep in the same room as her mother till she was 18.
Because her mother was petrified that one of her nefarious uncles were going to make an attempt on her life.
I don't think it's that, well, that's what she said. But
that's what the mother said.
That's what the mother said,
yeah.
But I think what the mother really wanted to do was to have, for Victoria to be so emotionally dependent on her that when she became queen, she couldn't do anything without her mother and her mother's advisor/lover, Sir John Conroy. So that was the setup. And
they really were hoping for a regency, but joke's on them because Victoria became 18 like a month before she ascended the throne.
King William IV, her uncle, who loathed Victoria's mother, said, I am just not going to die until Victoria's 18, and he didn't. And so she became queen. And she was completely unprepared. I mean, she knew how to dance, she knew how to play the piano, she could do really good watercolors, but she knew nothing about, you know, she'd been to the opera a lot, she'd seen Shakespeare, she's obsessed with Anne Boleyn, but she didn't know anything about the Constitution or law or any of that. So that was, I think, a real, you know, so she had to kind of, you know, have the confidence to be queen, even though she hadn't been educated for it at all. And she did it brilliantly. And one of the things I love about her is that she just kept pushing back. You know, she was not this sort of demure little girl. She was really quite sort of powerful. She had a real power, even at the age of 18. And it wasn't just the fact that she was queen. Obviously, that helps. But she was this, you know, she was a bit of a dynamo. I always think of Victoria as being like the weather. You know, when she was smiling, it was like sunny. And when she was cross, you know, everyone was like, whoa, you know, because she had a certain kind of presence. And when I cast Jenna Coleman to be Victoria, everyone said, oh, you can't have Jenna Coleman because Victoria was so ugly. And I'm thinking, well, she probably wasn't quite as beautiful as Jenna Coleman. But the point is that when somebody is queen, they suddenly look a whole lot better. It's an amazing thing. It's an amazing
That's a very good
thing.
point.
Yeah, you suddenly find them very attractive. And I was completely fascinated by that, the sort of the panoply of power. And I
Can you
suppose,
actually hand me the book back?
yes. And then as I got into writing about her and Albert, you realize that Albert is this fabulously handsome, I mean, he was really quite handsome, amazing. He then lost his hair, and that's where all the Windsor receding hairline begins. But Albert was a sort of handsome young prince. He'd been to university, so he was the first royal ever to have gone to university, British royal. And but he was a German princeling, and he was from a famous family of sort of, you know, the Saxe-Coburgs were a family of, they were a bit like the Kardashians. They were sort of famous for being fit. And they just married into the royal families of Europe because they were all really good looking and, you know, they
Noble
were
enough.
Yeah, they'd go anywhere, you know. Anyway, Albert turns up, he's kind of brilliant. I mean, I think Albert's probably the most intelligent royal personage there's ever been. And he accomplished a huge amount. But, oh my God, I would not want to be married to him because he was, I mean, Victoria and Albert had 9 children. Now, one of the reasons they had 9 children was Victoria loved sex. I mean, she was like, when, you know, in 1854, after the birth of her 9th child, her doctor says to her, you know, I really don't think you should have another child now because, you know, it's kind of, you know, you go a bit weird after them and everything. She goes, what, doctor, no more fun in bed? I mean, she actually says that. You know, that's not how you think of Queen Victoria, is it? And so she was very keen to go to bed with Albert, but what she didn't like was having children. However, he was very keen for her to have children because every time she gets pregnant, he kind of steps in and sort of helps do all the boxes and whatever. And so, you know, and there's this big deal when she's pregnant with her first child and she goes into labor, they have to appoint a regent, you know, for the time when she's having the baby because, you know, there's no head of state because she obviously can't be head of state and have a baby at the same time, you know, just in the delivery room. And so there's a lot of debate about who it should be, you know, should it be, you know, one of her uncles or whatever? And she says, no, it's, you know, it's got to be Albert. And they're like, oh, but he's German and all this sort of stuff. But finally, he becomes regent. And then, of course, he becomes regent every time she goes into labor, 9 times. And every time she has a baby, she had very bad postnatal depression. So there'd be a few months where she really wasn't up to anything, at which point he would just step in and take over. And so by the end of their marriage, they were married for 21 years until he dies, age 42. Effectively, he's running the country. And he really kind of pushes her out. However, the thing is that, you know, yes, he's the one saying, oh, I think the Bishop of Lichfield should be this or whatever. But the real thing that makes Victoria so central in the British imagination is that in 1849, photography is invented. And she is the first monarch to be photographed. And if you think about it, that is such an important point because before that, people's image of monarchy is about paintings of a woman with a crown sitting on a throne, and then you see them in engravings, and they're not like real people. They're these extraordinary sort of slightly Olympian beings. But then suddenly she's being photographed, you know, in a bonnet with her 9 children. And these photographs are being displayed all over the country. And that's suddenly, it's like, oh, the Queen is one of us, you know. And that's where the sort of fantasy of the royal family being this middle-class family. A middle class in England means slightly different things than what it means here. But, you know, this ordinary family, just like us, in bonnets, you know, with all these children, you know, oh, isn't that lovely? You know, and that made such a difference because before that, the monarchy was so unpopular. They all thought, oh, these wretched old men with their mistresses and their corruption and their scandals. And suddenly you've got this sweet family with the 9 children and the bonnets. And suddenly so it's soft power and the power of image is huge. And Victoria was very aware of that. She really understood branding. Yeah. And that sounds very modern, but I suppose that's why, you know, it's just such a, she got it. She got that. Even though, you know, she might not have been to university and she wasn't as clever as Albert, but she knew the visual impact of that.
Speaking of Albert, you did such a wonderful job. First of all, the pregnancy thing, I think about that a lot. As I was watching the show, you know, I was like, Mr. Science? Yeah. He can't figure out how to not get her pregnant? Like, he didn't want to. You make a very good point. But another moment, I stood up and kind of went like this also my period of history studies was Victorian. And when you have Albert first appear, she's playing the piano, and he comes over to her to turn the page.
Yes.
The motif of that is so beautiful because it really was, I'm here to help you move this country into the next era, and I'm your helpmate. And the partnership of them, it was just such a beautiful moment. And I think you end the episode on it, and it's very strong. I just want to say that.
Oh, thank you. Well, okay. I thought it was, I'm actually getting goosebumps.
Me too, in reliving it. 3 minutes, so I just want to end on this quote because I think this gets to the power dynamic. This is right when she's becoming queen. She thought of all those eyes in the abbey that would be looking at her, how many of them would be waiting for her to make a slip, to prove their suspicion that she was unworthy of the great office bestowed upon her. Victoria bit her lip, but then she put her shoulders back and lifted her chin. She would not make a mistake. She had been chosen for this role by a divine providence that had left her, the daughter of George III's 6th child, heir to the throne. If her uncles had been less profligate, there would have been a dozen legitimate children between her and the throne, but they had been so distracted by the pleasures of the flesh that the crown had come to her. Victoria knew that there had been a reason for this, a divine purpose, and she was determined to prove worthy of it. Do you think she had that awareness? Is this a novelistic kind of,
No, I think and I think Queen
there
Elizabeth,
was something to prove?
I think Queen Elizabeth had the same thing. They both firmly believed that they'd been put on the throne by God.
Sure.
You know, and I sort of think you have to feel. I don't think they had imposter syndrome because, you know, they felt they'd been singled out, you know, for this particular role. And, you know, the Queen obviously knew Victoria knew, I think she writes about it, she knew from the age of 11 that she was going to one day be queen. And, you know, she was like, yeah, I'm going to be ready for this. And so she knew if she just hold on, she would get there. And I think it's... Yeah, I always imagine that she kind of she never gave up power. So she definitely felt that she'd been destined to be queen. And I think that's a very powerful thing. And even though she had quite a lot of sort of things go, you know, Albert basically by the end of their marriage was, if I say that the thing she said about him at the end was, he always used to choose my bonnets. Okay, that could be a sweet thing, or it could be like, what kind of husband chooses their wives' hats? I mean, you know, so she had to push back. So there was a lot of pushing back in her life. But to me, she's a heroine. And I think she's much maligned. Everyone says, oh, Victoria, she wasn't a very good mother, was she? And I think, has anybody ever said, Henry VIII, what a bad father? So we end on that note, I think.
That. Thank you so much, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, the program will begin in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and silence all cell phones. The program is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tim Bovary and Graham Moore with Doug Miller.
morning and welcome. Have you had fun? Yes. It's almost sad, isn't it? It's amazing how fast it goes. I was talking to someone out in the pavilion, and they were mentioning how they were talking to a friend, telling them they should come, they should buy tickets, how great this was. And she said it's hard to tell them how much fun this is and how well it's run and all the kinds of stuff. So anyway, so you're in for a treat. I love history. I started to read historical fiction. You have a great historian and a great historical fiction writer. So we thought it would be a great occasion to have the two of them talk together. They do somewhat the same thing, but not really. So we're going to talk about that. I'm going to try to stay out of this. I want it to be a conversation between the two of them. And I wanted to say one more thing. I personally wanted to thank Jamie because he picks he does this. He picks these authors, the most amazing people. And then he decides who gets to interview them. And I've been lucky over the last 4 or 5 years to interview just amazing people. So Jamie, thank you very much. All right, so Tim has written Allies at War, Appeasement, fabulous books. There's only a few more left over at the bookstore if you're interested in them. They are so good. And Graham, we're going to talk about Wealth of Shadows. You wrote The Last Days of Light, The Sherlockium. And one book that's kind of historical fiction that I talked to you about, The Holdout, and I'm going to say something about that today too. They're fabulous. There's only a couple left of some of those over there, so please run over them and buy them. And then you were the screenwriter for The Imitation Game. Incredible, incredible. So,
thanks, Tim. That's so nice.
So Jamie picked two really good people, right? All right, so the first thing I want to ask is, why did you both decide to write about history?
I feel like you should start because you, unlike me, are an actual historian. Talk to me about that, Tim. Talk to me about expertise and having some.
This is I essentially do what Graham does for people who don't have imagination and bucket loads of talent and Oscar ambitions, all of which you've achieved at a really quite irritatingly early age. I studied history at university. I've been fascinated by it forever. All of the things I'm most interested in tended to have happened in the past. My musical tastes, my artistic tastes, my architectural tastes. And I grew up in a country which is filled with relics of the past. I was taught history when I was a boy at what we call prep school in a medieval classroom where there were scrapes on the walls where people used to sharpen their arrows. I had prayers in Salisbury Cathedral, an extraordinary 13th century building. I then studied history at Oxford University, which is, you can't, if you were blindfolded, you would still feel the sense of history as you walk around that place. And I probably wasn't very talented at anything else, and I had the naive idea that money didn't matter, and so I became a historian.
So, Graham, why did you write about history?
Also a good question. And I guess the question, too, is why write about history without actually being a historian? I think it's some of the same, maybe for some of the same reasons. I did not come from a place with nearly as much history. I'm from Chicago. And now I live on the east side of Los Angeles, the most history-bare chunk of earth on all the earth. I think I just get excited about particular stories. I think so much about what I do is, do you remember when you were in high school and you would hear a song on the radio? And even saying this out loud probably dates me. But you'd hear a song on the radio, and you'd need to go tell all your friends about it. You'd say, oh, I've heard this song. I've never heard this before. You have to hear this thing. I'm so obsessed with this thing. And let me talk your ear off about how much I love it and why I love it so much. I think that mode is somehow my professional life now. I just get excited about these very specific stories, and I love them so much. So my My last novel, The Wealth of Shadows, I was saying this to you earlier, it was about this figure from history. His name's Ansel Luxford. You've never heard of him before. No one has ever heard of him before. No one has ever written about him before. When he died, there were no obituaries published about him. He is the most obscure figure possible to write an entire novel about. But I heard about him, and I heard his story, and I just got so obsessed with it. And then it felt like, oh, I'm so obsessed with this, I'm going to somehow spend every day for the next 4 years learning everything I can about it. And then, because, again, given the obscurity of it, there's only so much we can know, Tim has to stick to, I believe they're called facts. I am not so bound. And so what I get to do, and I think I'm making fun of it, but legitimately I would argue that a reason that historical fiction is useful as a form is that you can take real history, and then where real history simply where the historical record is simply mute, I get to come in and say, okay, let me hypothesize, let me imagine, let me kind of create the gaps here to the best of my ability. Let me try to get inside. Or even to say, I'm going to try and imagine what it must have felt like to be that person on that day, having that conversation, and I can create the dialogue that we don't have a record of, and I can create the emotional state that we certainly don't have a record of, which is a good opportunity for me to ask you this question. How do you grapple with the limits of where your research can take you? Because you must have that point where there's gaps, right? There's something that isn't properly documented, and then how do you grapple with that?
There are huge gaps, and it depends whether you're talking about a major decision taken in a room which there aren't records of. Was it the case that Tony Blair, when he visited George W. Bush at his ranch in Texas shortly after 9/11, signed the UK up to joining the US in the war in Iraq? This great mystery we don't know, and there are no official records of it, and only about 4 people in the world really know exactly what happened. But then also, what was Stalin really feeling during the Battle of Stalingrad? He hasn't left a diary or something. So you can speculate to a certain extent, but you've got to very clearly mark at what stage I am speculating about this and using my historical judgment rather than suggesting that this is a fact, and what is the difference between the two of them.
Do you find then when you're writing that on a sort of prose level, you're trying to distinguish to the audience, oh, this is something I can prove, and this is something I'm sort of nudging towards?
Yes, and with the you can flag it with an awful lot of words, hypothesize, skeptical. We may conjecture, whatever you like. Generally, I find that there's greater problems. There are more facts than one can fit in. There's more that we do know that people probably don't want to read. This is the problem with doing what we both do, is you can get obsessed with a real story, and what is our obsession isn't always everyone else's obsession, and they're not reading your book in the way that we write it. We're agonizing over every single sentence, but then I suddenly think, I have spent 4 hours on this one sentence, and someone is going to read it, if I'm lucky, after they've drunk half a bottle of wine on an aeroplane. Are they going to care that I have wondered about whether it should be commas or dashes and parentheses? And I really nerdily and weirdly care about the aesthetics of a page. And I have a certain view that brackets are ugly and should only be used in certain contexts. Does anyone care about that? Am I really wasting my time? So, but working out what are the limits of your obsession and how far other people are going to be interested in your obsession is a great challenge for you as well as a novelist and as a screenwriter, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's impossible, and I frequently find, I will say the most excited I get is when I've published something or I've made a film and I've done something and someone comes up to me afterwards and they say they like it, and that's always very nice. But if the things they say they like about it are also the things that I really like about it, that's the most exciting. But then you get the thing where sometimes someone says, oh, and I really like the thing, and I really liked how you did blah, 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 and you're like, that I did? Really? Was that part of it? I don't even really remember. That wasn't what I'd intended at all. And after Imitation Game, actually, a dear friend of mine, a really close friend of mine came up to me, and she'd come to an early screening of that movie and said, she was like, oh, and I loved it so much because it has so much to say about the class conflict in Britain in the 1930s. I was like, no, it doesn't. That doesn't even, thank you, Christine, but that doesn't come up at all in the course of this film. Sure. Okay, and I see you thinking in your mind, like, trying to
I think it does come up a bit. You've got the tall, good-looking good, and he's, there are different classes in the hut.
Barely.
People say, and that the conversation behind every conversation in Britain is about class, and allegedly that it's been said the difference between Britain and America is that race has played the same part in American history and social history. But what the huge difference between your work and mine is people can freely interpret your work and take away from it what they wish, even if you think they're completely misguided. It only ever happens to me in certain circumstances when people will come up and say, I'm really interested about Neville Chamberlain, and I've read your book, and do you think it's the case that he was buying time for Britain to rearm? At which point I think, yes, well, you clearly haven't read my book, because I've been dealing with this in a great deal and arguing very much that was not the case. But your work is open to interpretation. That's fun, and it can mean it can have a wider constituency, because it can cater to an awful lot of people.
So can I ask you a question?
Sorry, we'll
I was just going to sit down here because this was too good. Yeah. So Tim, do you think that Graham has some literary freedoms that you don't have?
Definitely, but he's also got, I'm sure, some copious amounts more literary talent than I've got.
Oh.
I think that, yes, he's got, Graham and I were just talking before.
I feel like a child being talked about by his parents. When he's like, say your things about Graham, like, I'm right here.
Yeah. Graham and I were talking just before this about whether I'd ever thought of any of my books being adapted for film and television, and I have, and it would be a really lovely thought which would, if came to fruition, put food on the table. But it can't really happen, because these are vast stories with huge casts of characters, and almost all of the characters, because of the era at which it is and the social system that was in place then, are men. And very few television series get made which has an exclusively male, exclusively white cast these days. But if I was Graham and doing what he's done, I could just make up a female ambassador who has been sent to, or an attaché, and add in a love story into that. And I don't have that freedom to do that. So I am constrained by these annoying facts and parameters. It is odd, but people can still criticize. There's a distinguished American historian of the Holocaust called Omar Bartov, who wrote a genuinely very nice review of my book in the Times Literary Supplement. And then he just posited at the end of it, he said, there are very few women in this book, which is true. But you then have to say which women I left out. It's not my fault that there weren't women in high places in the US State Department. In fact, women weren't allowed to be US ambassadors and senior members of the US State Department. There was only one woman in Roosevelt's cabinet, and she had a domestic portfolio, not a foreign-facing portfolio. I'm not responsible for the patriarchy.
So could you, go ahead, no, you.
Well, I was just going to talk about reviews, because there's always that funny thing in reviews generally where there's even in something very nice, it's like, the version of this story that I would have told would have been about so-and-so. Graham or Tim has chosen to tell this story, and it's pretty good, but why did they tell that story rather than this other one? And you're sort of like, because, I don't know, that was the one if you want a different thing, I'm sorry for not providing you the other thing that you...
You're generally dealing with frustrated people who have wished that they could have written this book and have always thought of writing this book, but have never got around to writing this book, and think that they're going to give you a distillation of their book in their review of your book.
So I want to go back to the beginning, because we talked about, Tim, that you write historical nonfiction books, and I think you would agree you write historical fiction. Mm-hmm. And then I want you to define those terms, but also there's a new term that I've been hearing about, primarily in historical nonfiction books, narrative history, and writing in a narrative manner. Can you kind of distill those three down, how each of you perceive it?
Well, I do write narrative nonfiction, and although I can say that everything in my book is true, every fact that is in it is footnoted, that's why it's quite thick, because there are end notes at the back, so it's not actually as long as it looks, if any of you rash enough to want to buy it. But the point of doing the narrative is to engage the reader. and also to capture what was an extraordinarily exciting time, and to not just begin at the beginning and say, on the 3rd of September 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany, and take a chronological approach. You can use literary forms. Both of my books have begun in medias res, in the midst of things, in the middle of one of the most dramatic, consequential episodes of the entire story, what in film terms would be called a flash forward, so that hopefully you are then immediately pitched into the story, and then you ravel back to see how we have possibly got there, and there are the twists and turns. And I use as many literary devices as I can: irony, dramatic irony, cliffhangers. I think we haven't had some dialogue for a long time. This needs to break up. It's like a piece of music. Everything can't be at the same pitch. It can't be at the same dynamic. At the same time, it has to have rhythm, which ebbs and flows and contrasts. So that is the essence of narrative, but then it's also got to be historical, and you've got to be answering serious questions at the time. Otherwise, why aren't you just writing a good novel?
That sounds hard when you say it like that. You could just make a bunch of stuff up, and then it gets so much easier. Again, I'm joking, but I think this idea that it also sounds like this description of narrative. I also am sort of unclear on what the narrative and narrative nonfiction means. It sounds like it kind of means nonfiction, but good, or sort of like well-written. Like that has, like,
narrative nonfiction is very unpopular in British academic circles. And
why?
Probably because it's quite close to storytelling. And so, and stories are what children read, allegedly. And people, look, there's huge amounts.
But everybody reads. What do you...
Well, I'm paraphrasing what the academics would say, not what I think. They would say, an academic in their ivory tower would say, you are dealing with a complex subject, it should be pure analysis, and you do not need to tell a story here, and you shouldn't try and engage a wider audience. It's almost the case that academics take a certain pride in the fewer readers that they have. The fewer the readers the book has, the more academic it must surely be. And anyone who commits the great sin of becoming popular or successful has to be ejected from the academy. So that's the big difference. But I think, and it's always been my ambition, is to marry these two things. So, for instance, let's deal with, we've both written about the Second World War, and I'm writing a narrative of the Second World War, but there are certain fundamental questions which, at various points, I need to analyze or wish to analyze, such as, what is the reason that novelists, filmmakers, and historians keep on coming back to the Second World War? One reason is because we think of it, and it is in many respects, this ultimate clash of good against evil. But at the same time, in order to win the war, the British and the Americans are collaborating with Joseph Stalin and the communists. And they are making a lot of Eastern and Central Europe and parts of Far East Asia not, as Woodrow Wilson would have liked, safe for democracy. They're making it safe for Soviet communism. So how do you now square that with the good war, good versus evil? And that's a complicated question, and one which I delve into in a section which would come under the analysis and interpretation part, and the narrative is paused at that point. So you can combine the two, and I think everyone should write to want to be read. Otherwise, I don't quite see what the point is, and you should write to want to be read by the most number of people. If you believe in your work, that might sound arrogant, but I think if you don't believe in your work, if you don't believe it's worthwhile, then why should anyone else?
Yeah, I don't think that's arrogant. I think it takes a lot, right? If you say, look, I think about this all the time. If I'm going to work on anything, I have to be able to say, okay, one, whenever a new project comes up, I have to be able to say, if I choose to do this, if I choose to work on this, 4 years is the minimum amount of time that it's taken me to finish anything. It's usually between 4 and 6. And it's like, okay, so if I'm going to do this, I have to want to talk about this and work on it every single day for the next 4 to 6 years. And if I can't commit to that now, walk away. If this isn't going to be interesting to me every single day for 4 to 6 years, walk away. And also, if I don't think that I'm going to be able to create something at the end of this that's 300 pages and is going to it takes a while for a reader to read a 300-page novel, and if I don't think that I can make that worth his or her time, then why am I doing it? It can't just be for my own vanity or something. There has to be some real reason behind it. It was funny hearing you just talk about the good versus evil of the Second World War, and that's why people keep coming back to it. Because I will say, I keep telling people I never want to sort of work on something about the Second World War again, and yet I keep, despite my best intentions, coming back to it. And I've been trying to figure out even what that is for me. If it's that, I will say with this last book, the thing that started getting me is I did this little exercise where I started reading through the front page of the New York Times every single day, January 1st to January 1st in the year 1939. And they have that thing on the New York Times homepage. It's like the Times Machine thing, and you can just quickly flip through all the homepages for any year. It's fun. You should do it if you think that's fun, which I do. And there was this thing, if you guys ever do this as an exercise, Tim knows more about 1939 than I do, but I mean, it's sort of the most apocalyptic year in human civilization. You just read through the front page of the newspaper every day in 1939, and I try to imagine what it must feel like to wake up every day and open that newspaper and feel that sense of, oh, is the world ending? I mean, this is really bad. And now it can be so easy to look back at the Second World War as this kind of good triumphs over evil story, but as Tim, I think, was just pointing out, at the time, I don't know that it felt that way at all. I think
it could, to certain people, feel like that at that time, but it's certainly more complicated than that. At the end of my book, all about every single major decision the Allies took, I realized that I hadn't mentioned the word Holocaust. And I thought, this is a problem, and I am going to get picked up about this in reviews, and I then went back and wrote about it. But there was a very specific reason why I had not written about the Holocaust, because it was not discussed at a single Allied conference, despite the fact that the British and the Americans knew about it from 1942, and it was not the subject of a single piece of correspondence, not between Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, but also at lower levels of the bureaucracy and the diplomatic corps. So the section in the book about discussing the Holocaust is, why was that? This is the dog that did not bark in the night. So again, good versus evil. There are reasons, and they're not purely anti-Semitic reasons why the Holocaust was not discussed. But it's a more complex subject, and yet still fundamentally, even in collaboration with Joseph Stalin, what he did and his murderous regime, there has never been a more existential political military threat to the world than Nazi Germany, and my enemy's enemy is my friend was a maxim that had to be applied at the time, and I think that still holds good. It's also the most dramatic conflict, and in so many different layers. You're writing about, and things which in other instances are probably not that sexy, like economics, suddenly, to a layperson, I know economics is deeply sexy to economists, economics, in the context of the Second World War, the subject of your book, suddenly becomes profoundly dramatic and interesting. So, and that can be true of loads of different things.
Right, there's these sort of instant stakes to it. Yeah. And that's certainly what I found interesting. And I was interested in writing about economics for a while, and I didn't know that much about it. Because I'm a non-expert, unlike you, I get to either have the benefit of the curse of when I'm doing a new thing. This book is about an economist, so it was like, oh, I don't know anything about economics. Great, I get to spend 6 months doing the really fast kind of graduate level economics course that I never got to take before. So let me take myself through that, and let me find some experts and get them on the phone and have them tell me things to read, and let me try and read them, and let me try to understand it. Let me try and understand it to the point where I can then call those experts and have a conversation with them sort of on that, at least in the same sort of zone as they are about their subject matter. That tends to be my test with experts is, can I get on if I feel like I know enough about the material to start writing about it when I can kind of maintain a conversation with a real expert in the subject on the general field. And then it has these instant stakes, right? How you finance the American war effort, how American economists develop a scheme in part to finance the British war effort, and sort of vice versa. was, on one level, that could be a kind of dry academic exercise. On the other hand, how many people were getting killed every day because this problem hadn't been solved? And so it's just this instant, we have to do this now, and it feels like the world is ending, and the world probably was literally ending had they not.
Yeah, the stakes couldn't be higher.
It's so interesting to listen to your conversation, which I love, because the more you talk, the more you seem to be saying the same thing. So what I want to ask you about now then is, what about your research? Do you research in the same way for a historical fiction as opposed to a nonfiction book?
I should probably ask you. I feel like I call people like you and have you explain things to me. And so the next book, I'm just going to call you. It'll be great. But you can't call people like me. I can't explain anything to you.
Well, I'm sure that's not true, but I write a huge cast list. Every person I ever come across in a letter, in a document, I then write their name down. So somebody has said that in a letter to their wife home from the Casablanca conference, well, I've just been talking to General Fritz McGee, the attaché to General Marshall's new attaché, or he's probably not a general, Colonel Fitz McGee. Okay, I'm now writing the name Colonel Fitz McGee. I've got to go and find his papers. Where are they? Are they at an institution? If they're not an institution, where are his descendants? Have they got some diaries or letters in the attic? And for the Allies at War book, I went through over 100 different collections of private papers in this country and in Britain, which is why it took 3 years to research, and then it took 2.5 years to write. Indeed, the entire process took longer than the events that the book describes, which is so longer than the Second World War. But it's a very exhaustive process of research. But I would not feel that I had to do that to such an extent if I suddenly felt this is a really difficult question to answer. I could just make up the answer, which is what the freedom that you have as a creative.
Yeah, if something's missing, I mean, it's always this thing about primary source research versus secondary source research. What am I doing? This book was funny because Wealth of Shadows, as I was saying, is about this totally unknown figure named Ansel Luxford. So there was no secondary source research. No one had ever written about him before, and it was funny hearing you describe that.
Can I ask you, who mentioned this man to you, who nobody had heard of, and where did the idea come from?
So one of them was your friend that I just learned about, Richard Davenport Hines, who wrote a book about a biography of John Maynard Keynes, and I think there may be one. I was really interested in the Bretton Woods Conference, this economic conference that ended the Second World War. I know whenever I talk about an economic conference, you can just feel the energy in the room. Just ratchet up a couple of degrees. Fascinating economic conference. I was really interested in it. And so I do what I tend to do, which is kind of poke around at it, and was reading some books about it. Was reading, John Maynard Keynes was there, so I was reading biographies of Keynes. I was kind of reading around it. This was years ago. I mean, this was before I really started the book. I didn't know what it was going to be. It was just something I was interested in. I have these lists of, things I'm kind of interested in, and then I just sort of, in the background of the other stuff I'm doing, poke around. And so, honestly, I was reading various histories, and this name, Ansel Luxford, just a stray sentence here, a stray sentence there, he kept getting mentioned as this low-level guy who was just, he was in this room, and he was in that room, and here he is in a meeting with Keynes, and here he is in a meeting with, here he is at the White House, here he is at all these places. And here he is in Whitehall. It was just a sort of, who is the, maybe it was the name was odd, and so it sort of poked out at me, and I just kept noticing he just kept showing up all these places. And I'd never heard of him before, and you look around, and no one's ever written about him before, and his name doesn't show up in the appendices at the end of the books. No one cared. But I don't know, it just seemed interesting. Who is this guy? Why was he there? So I found his children who are still alive, and first I talked to his daughter, who was really lovely, about her dad for a while, and then she put me in touch with one of his sons, who was, he's a sheep herder in rural Montana, so he lives off the grid. He doesn't have an email or anything. He only has this satellite phone to connect him to the world, but he only turns it on once a month. So getting this guy on the phone was it took months, because you have to set up to call when he turns on the phone, but you have to set that up a month in advance, and it was a process. Finally get the guy on the phone, And he's so nice. And answer, yes, this is Graham. And he said, oh, yes, my sister told me she spoke to you. And I said, yes, so I'm really interested in your father. I just think he's this interesting figure who no one's ever really written about before. And he says to me, you know, can I tell you, I've been waiting for this phone call my entire life.
Well, if it turned on his phone, I got
Yeah, who knows how many people called before me. And I said, oh my gosh, that's so touching. Why is that? And he said, well, I assume you want to write about how my dad was secretly a spy. And I sort of made that noise. And then I think I mumbled something like, well, I do now. So let's talk about that. And so the book ends up being, then I found more kind of sources to back up the story, but that sent me off on this very strange journey of, oh, this is an interesting figure who no one's written about before. You know, talking to his 3 children. The children were really great resources, but if you ask any 3 children to tell me about your dad, you will get 3 very different answers and very different portraits. So that was something where not being a real historian was sort of useful, because I could say, which of these children's version of their father is true? I don't know, and I get to kind of make a lot narratively about this, right? I get to use bits of their different stories. I get to sort of develop what I think is true through the family. I've now gotten to know, it was very sweet when the book came out. Some of the grandkids came to the release and stuff, and it was really lovely. But it was sharing old family photos and things. So I think that was the first time I've worked on something where I've gotten to sort of dive in a kind of primary source way. Though again, with this, all right, I'm hearing different stories. So I'll say, like, the daughter does not think her dad was a spy. She was like, my brother's crazy, he never was. And the brother's kind of like, oh, come on. Yeah, why did he keep going to Panama in the 50s on these mysterious business trips that never made sense? It was always this, you're like, why did he? And she's like, oh yeah, why did he keep going to Panama? And so you'd sort of weave through the family history a little bit. So I think that was a different research experience than I've gotten to work on before. And again,
Did you try CIA files?
We filed Freedom of Information Act requests, but that no one ever wrote back. We found some stuff. There was a real. So again, I did this where just called Real Historians, and there was a wonderful woman named Rebecca Erbelding, who is a scholar in residence at the U.S. Holocaust Museum in D.C. And you probably knew this. I did not. That the Holocaust Museum in D.C. just has scholars in residence. Like, she's just kind of around researching things, and she doesn't seem to have to, like, publish in any regimented way. She just researches things for people. It was amazing, and she was so lovely. And I called her and I said, I'm interested in Ansel Luxford because she'd written a book that mentions him exactly once for one sentence, and because he was in some room for some meeting. And I was like, I think there's a secret history about work being done, this kind of top secret work being done, kind of espionage work within the Treasury Department during the Second World War, and I think Ansel Luxford is at the center of it. And she said, oh yeah, so actually I was in the basement of the Treasury Department once, and I found this box. And I said, okay, Rebecca, tell me about the box. And she said, well, it turns out that yes, this group at the Treasury Department wrote their own first-person account of what they did during the war, and there's one copy, and I was the first person who ever opened it. It's recently declassified. It's just kind of sitting there, and you can't see it, but yeah, I've seen it. And I said, wow. And she said, do you want to, she said, well, you know, I took photographs. You took photographs? And she said, yeah, I went down there with my iPhone, and I just snapped a photo of every one of these 800 pages of this document. Do you want it? And I said, yeah. And so then the next day, she sends me, I still have it on my phone, she sends 800 iPhone photos of, like, each page of this thing. They're still on my phone amongst the pictures of my children. And so, though, I mean, these are the things where I start to really admire historians like yourself, because then you even start to get into that, and I think there's stuff in there that is not accurate. I mean, I think they were not totally honest, even in their own self-recorded history of what they were doing. Like, I run into this problem a lot, where I feel like no one's entirely honest in their papers, in their letters, in their anything, and so I feel like, okay, I get to make educated I get to make my own choices about sort of what I'm going to believe and what not to believe. I just really want to ask you, how do you deal with, how do I put this, dishonesty on the part of the...
That was question number 12.
Well, it's pervasive. I'm sure quite a lot of people in this room have read Winston Churchill's war memoirs, History of the Second World War, or his memoirs of the First World War called The World Crisis. Great line by the former British Prime Minister Arthur Balfour, who was Churchill's colleague beforehand. He wrote to his wife, said, "Winston's written a book about himself and called it The World Crisis." But these are not accurate histories. They are set out as accurate histories. They're not even entirely accurate memoirs. They are a fragment. So you have to more than triangulate. I'm too bad at trigonometry to know other sort of polyglot science, but you triangulate Churchill's memoirs with the minutes of whatever conference it is, with the letters of those people who attended it, with other people's memoirs, and with letters that were written at the time, and then you've got all of that, and then what should set you out as a historian or not as a historian is to make a judgment of what you think the most likely scenario is, and then try and explain to the reader what the consequences or causes of this set of circumstances or judgment were. But I'm fascinated, that you have found this real story and you have decided to turn it into a novel. If I'd done this, I would think, gosh, I want to get to absolutely, as a historian, what this man really was doing, and then I'm going to write it as a non-fiction book. And because, in so many ways, when we can think of great stories in certain circumstances, not always, truth is as dramatic as fiction. Whereas you, being an extraordinarily creative person, didn't have to go to all this trouble, didn't have to get the man on the phone in Montana, didn't have to get the 800. You could have made this man up as a Treasury official who was a spy. You could have just brought him out. But you got a real person and nevertheless then wanted to fictionalize your account.
Yeah, but I think, as you're saying, the true story is so much stranger than anything I could have invented. And yes,
so
I had to invent...
it's powerful to say to everyone, this is all based on a true story. That's part of its USP. It's not just a Frankenstein creation.
Yes, and I don't think I'm a talented enough writer to have made up Ansel Luxford. He was too interesting, and his family was too interesting. The fact that his becomes a big part in the book, that while Ansel was working in this top secret kind of project at the Treasury Department at the beginning of the Second World War, his wife was working at the FBI, who was... That's its own story about what the FBI was doing in the early days of the Second World War. Had I made that up, everyone would say, that's ridiculous. Come on. You can't. Now you're tying in this FBI storyline and this whole thing. I didn't make it up. That was really what was happening. Like, it's so much stranger. All the little details that the real world provided me, the strange details of his wife's family and his wife's parents, that all the stuff that's in the book, the personal history, I'd love to believe that I'm that good at making things up, but I'm just not. I mean, I think all the real stuff is more interesting than the things I had to fill in. The things that I'm filling in are, I think, where the record, again, just doesn't, it only goes so far. And I think I did keep saying to Rebecca, the historian who I was working with, I kept saying to her, you found this thing, and you are a historian. Why don't you write a proper piece of nonfiction? And she kept going, I don't know, I don't have time, I do this other thing. You just go nuts. I hope she will one day. I mean, I think someone should actually take this material and do proper nonfiction with it, rather than sort of relying on me to fill in the gaps and narrativize it the way I do.
So I have so many more questions, but we've only got 5 minutes. I would like each of you, if you don't mind, and if we have some time left, I'll ask another question, but I really want each of you to read the first page of your book, because your writing is beautiful. First paragraphs are important to me as a reader because it kind of sets the tone and it tells me whether I'm going to like it on page 10 or not. But Tim, can I have you read?
Sure.
And it starts on this page and ends at the top of the next page.
So I hope that this gives an indication of what we were discussing earlier, what is narrative and how you can try and be literary while at the same time having everything that you write be true. If it doesn't illustrate that, then I'm in the wrong profession, and you definitely should not buy the book. As was typical of that fateful spring, the day began in glorious sunshine. Walking through London, the chaff from the plane trees floating in the breeze, the senior assistant secretary to the War Cabinet, Colonel Leslie Hollis, marvelled at the serenity of the city. Clerks and civil servants on their way to work, typists in gay frocks, shoppers and soldiers, all stepped brightly about their business, oblivious to the danger that hung over them. When he reached Hendon Aerodrome, however, Hollis learned of the storm raging on the other side of the Channel. The Royal Air Force wanted to postpone the trip, but the Prime Minister was adamant. "To hell with that. I'm going whatever happens. This is too serious a situation to bother about the weather." The weather was indeed the least of Churchill's concerns. Not only had the Luftwaffe bombed the airfield at which he was due to arrive the previous evening, but the French Prime Minister, Paul Reynaud, when summoning his ally to this urgent and impromptu conference, had mentioned both the time and the location of the rendezvous over an open telephone line. Churchill was furious. Convinced that the Germans would have been listening in on the call, he ordered his assistant private secretary, Jock Colville, to ring up Reynaud's chef de cabinet and cancel the meeting as a deception before being persuaded that this would cause unacceptable chaos at the other end. As it transpired, it is hard to imagine what further mayhem could have ensued. Landing on the pockmarked airfield near Tours shortly before 1 p.m. on the 13th of June 1940, the Prime Minister and his party were disconcerted to find that there was no one there to meet them. "One sensed the increasing degeneration of affairs," recalled Churchill, who walked across the wet, dilapidated airfield toward a group of idling French airmen and requested une voiture. Eventually, the station commander's Citroën was commandeered, and the British set off in considerable discomfort towards the prefecture.
Starts here and goes to right there.
August 23rd, 1930. This sounds so, oh my God, after your plummy accent, hearing me do this with my American accent seems so lame. I'm from Chicago. August 23rd, 1939. Ansel Luxford was on his morning commute, his knees wobbling with the routine swerves of the Marshall Avenue trolley, when he glanced out at the banks of the Mississippi River and noticed a growing column of Nazis. More than 100 men descended in rows from the St. Paul side of the bridge. They strode 3 by 3, neat and orderly, in matching corduroy pants, blue ties, and tin-colored shirts. Most of the men had little red L's sewn on their front shirt pockets, probably hand-stitched by their Nazi wives, Ansel reckoned, who were likely at home that very moment raising their hordes of Nazi children. The trolley slowed, then began its climb onto the bridge. The flour mills of Minneapolis emerged in the distance, but Ansel barely heard the shriek of the trolley wheels. He was so horrified by the sight of a silver shirt march smack dab in the center of the Twin Cities. Just that morning, he'd sat at the breakfast table as Angela, papers spread out in front of her like ramparts against the day, recited the fresh, rotten news. Hitler had just sent 100,000 troops to stand ready for invasion along the Polish border. The Soviets had given tacit approval, agreeing the day before to appease the Germans with the Treaty of Non-Aggression. Britain and France were frantically seeking diplomatic solutions in the hopes of avoiding war. The United States was not seeking any sort of solution at all. She remained resolutely neutral in matters of European conflict. Angela carried the Morning Standard to the stovetops so that she could heat the baby's glass bottle while informing him of a new Elmo Roper poll. This next bit is true. A mere 12% of Americans thought that the United States should involve itself in any way in this European mess. The percentage who believed America should involve herself militarily, 2%. Another true statistic. Angela spoke the digits with disgust. Who were these people? What loafer could be comfortable sitting by, guffawing to Amos and Andy every week while the world went all to hell? Only a fool could believe that the murderous fascists threatening civilization would remain an ocean away. They weren't even on the other side of the Mississippi. There we go. You do see in these examples, though, like how you're so able to narratively weave in the setting, right? You describe the place perfectly accurately, the sunshine, like all these kind of lovely literary details into the real world thing. Whereas, and then I was just thinking this, I was reading mine was like, oh yes, it's like a novel, but with some facts, like with some numbers. It's a funny, yeah.
So we have to end there. I'm sorry, our time is up. But do you see why those books are so good? Thank you very much, both of you. Wonderful.
Thank you.
This was so much fun.
Same
Ladies and gentlemen, the program will begin in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and silence all cell phones. The program is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Taylor Jenkins Reid with Julia Whalen.
Back again. Hi, everyone. What a festival it's been. This is the last session. Thank you all for being here. You can watch the Melinda Gates session on YouTube later. So to start with, just so I have a sense of the room, how many people have read or listened to Atmosphere? Okay, fantastic. Love that. That said, Taylor, can you give us a little elevator pitch of what the book is?
Sure. Atmosphere is the story of Joan Goodwin, one of the first female astronauts to join the space shuttle program. And on mission STS-LR9, she is in the role of Capcom, which is the only voice on Earth that speaks to the crew. But early on in that mission, something goes terribly wrong, and it is up to Joan to get the crew home safely. But what no one in Mission Control knows is that Joan is madly in love with someone up on that shuttle, and she cannot live with herself if she doesn't get them home safely.
That's real good. Okay, so here's my history with the book. I've recorded every book in whole or in part of Taylor's her entire career. We have known each other for
10 years?
10 years?
Yeah.
Maybe, something like that. Wait, when did Daisy come out?
2017. So actually, we've known each other for longer than 10 years.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
we met in grade school. So I do consider myself, in all humility, your oldest fan. And, except for maybe Alex, her husband, okay, fine. But I constantly bother her, what are you working on next? She's very fast, she's very prolific, so there's always something to talk about. A few years ago, I remember asking you, what are you working on? And what's it about? And you said, it's about women in the space program in the early 80s. Amazing. And then I said, but what's it really about? And you said, it asks the question, if you were in love with someone you shouldn't be in love with, and no one could know you were in love with them, but it became clear that they were going to die, would you have the courage to tell them you loved them while the whole world watched? And I said, actually what I said I can't say here, but I said, oh, F you. So I want to actually start here, because I don't know the answer to this. Which came first, the setting and the situation, or that elemental tension of the theme?
The setting. I knew when I had thought of the idea before I wrote Carrie Soto. I was finishing Malibu Rising, and what I really loved about what I had been doing is, Daisy Jones is 70s rock and Malibu Rising is surfing, and those are very male-centered environments, and I really loved writing about the women that were forcing their way into those worlds, and I thought, well, what's a really male-centered world to write about next? And then I thought, space. When we think of an astronaut, we talk about men so often. So that was the first thing, but I didn't know. And then I was like, oh, obviously gay love story. But what that meant, I didn't know. And then when I started looking into what a story about space would offer me that another story could not, because ultimately, why are you setting it in space, right? Not just because you want to go there. There has to be fundamentally a reason why this story needs to take place in that environment. It has to be intrinsic to the story. And I started to think about this Capcom and crew member thing. And that's when I understood that I had a book, because I have plenty of ideas of, places to go in my mind, but you don't have a book until something really grabs you and you can focus in on that. So it was when I understood that Joan was Capcom. That was the beginning.
Interesting. This is a sidebar, but I think this is funny for people who were here last year. I was interviewing Kristen Hanna, and I've told Taylor this story, but I did an event with Kristen when the women came out, like the night before it came out, and we were in this huge auditorium in Orange County, and 1,400 people were in the audience. And at the end of it, we're trying to get off stage, and this woman comes up and she says to Kristen, you know what you need to write next? You need to write about women in the space program in the 80s. And we went off stage, and I was like, don't do it. It's like, there can't be two of you. Now, you knew nothing about space.
Nothing.
When you started writing this, but to be fair, you tend to do this.
Yeah.
Because you knew nothing about music when you started Daisy Jones and the Six.
Zero.
You knew nothing about surfing when you wrote Malibu Rising.
Never been on a
Tennis when you
surfboard.
wrote Carrie Soto.
Never held a racket.
Why do you hate yourself?
I know. Why do I? I think it stems from when I was younger. And no,
Let's go way back.
Yeah, I really like having a reason to research something, and so I think I'm well suited to the task. But for me, it has to do with I see a story, and then I need to become the person who could tell you that story. I don't want to be limited. I mean, if we're limited by what I know, I can tell you a lot of stories about sitting on the couch. I got so many of them. But I want to go learn something so that I can come back and tell you about it. I feel in some ways like I liken my job to a tour guide. I'm going to take you through here. And one of the things about being totally new to something is there are a lot of things about a job that are interesting, and there's a lot of things about them that are boring. And if you know the whole job, maybe you can't tell the difference. But I don't know anything about that job, so I know what would be interesting to a layman because I'm a layman. So when I research tennis, I'm like, yeah, I don't really care where the ball goes, but why is it called a slice, you know? That I can follow the thread of my own interest. With atmosphere, it was actually very difficult for me at first to get into the research because I'm just really not a science-minded person. This is not something that I really should tell anyone, but I recently had an MRI scan done of my brain, and they were like, oh, the left side of your brain is significantly smaller than the right side of your brain. Like, are you having any cognitive problems? And I was like, I don't think so. My friend Ashley was like, your whole life is a cognitive problem? But my access point that really just expanded my heart and gave me that tingle feeling was astronomy. And so I made Joan an astronomer, and I started to study the stars. And there are two modes of research for this book. One was that, and one was learning how the space shuttle works, and one of them was way more fun than the other one.
Do you find also that, I was wondering about this, like in the research, first of all, do you do the research and then sit down to write, or are they happening at the same time?
I do the research, but you don't know what you don't know. And so I do a lot of research. I get a sense of, oh, okay, that means the story could work like this. Or if the only people who could serve as Capcom are astronauts, then Joan has to be an astronaut. So how does she become you learn things like that. But when you start writing, that's when you're stopping every 3 seconds to be like, okay, what's the thing called that, they use to do this? Or when they're talking, are they on a microphone? Do they have microphones up in space? Or is there one microphone? And do they have sensors on all the time, or just when they're on a spacewalk? And, you're stopping every 2 seconds to try to find those answers, some of which are easier to find than others.
Do you find that what it takes to write about, and like I said, she's very fast, very professional, and I'm not sure that you have ever actually, I don't know if I know this, if you've ever abandoned a book in the middle. Right, okay. But it would seem to me that the curiosity of the research could be a helpful propellant to finishing that book. It's fed by your own curiosity. Is that true? Yeah,
to some degree. I also think that eventually you've done so much research, and it was so hard to get there that you're like, I have to finish this race.
You have to have something to show for it.
Yeah, if I found out how the hinges on the payload bay doors work for no reason, I can't live with myself.
So what was your research process like for this one? Where did you go? Were you looking at documentaries? Were you looking at books, talking to people?
It was a different process because it was so far beyond my understanding. As much as I joke about it, I really am a words and emotions person. I'm not a math person. And so I started by reading a lot of books, watching documentaries, but there was just way, way more information I needed on how the space shuttle works, how mission control works, what's possible, what's not possible. It's very important to me that I stick as close to the truth as possible, which is a in this situation was a considerable burden. I did think a few times, like, hear me out. I said it in 3027, and I can make up all the rules, you know?
Gravity doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just like what does happen to a body in microgravity? What's the difference between microgravity and zero gravity? What, you know? So I did a lot of research. One of the things that's incredible is that NASA is a government organization, which means that they have to make a lot of information available to the public. So I could find PDFs of NASA documents from the 1970s. I have multiple papers that were written on like a winch tool and why it's shaped this way and how it's supposed to work on the shuttle. You can just find that information. At one point I found, going through a number of, like a rabbit hole of things, every single press release that NASA put out from 1977 through 1980 something, you know, I could look at all the years that were involved in my story, know the actual dates that the astronauts were chosen, why they were hired, you know, it's incredible. But I still couldn't bridge that gap of what I needed to know and what I knew myself. So it was the first time ever I called someone and asked for help. And the person that I called, I mean, I went straight to the top. I don't know why he answered, but I got in touch with a man named Paul Dye, who is the longest-serving flight director at NASA. So if you think about Ed Harris and Apollo 13, he's the Ed Harris. And I said, I'm writing a book. Will you help me? And he's retired, and he was like, what do you need? Which was incredible. So we sat on a Zoom for hours and hours, 3-4 separate times. And it was really funny because coming up with a disaster in space is actually quite difficult because NASA put a lot of effort into making sure that there weren't that many. And I was like, well, what if I have a hydrazine explosion? And he was like, everybody be dead. Next. And I'm like, okay, what if there's a nitrogen leak into the cabin? He's like, nitrogen's on the other side of the space shuttle. Next. I'm like, that's all I have. And we went through this a few times, and eventually you could just tell. He would say to me multiple times, he was like, he would explain something. He'd be like, well, no, obviously ammonia runs through the thing to keep it cool down. You know, the student can do the work on her own time. And I'm like, yeah, totally. And then I think he just saw how hard I was working, and that the sad little left side of my brain couldn't do it. And he goes, okay, you can't have a nitrogen leak into the cabin, but you could have pressure leaving the cabin. And I was like, oh. And he's like, if two of them are on a spacewalk and they get hit by debris, and I'm like, okay, yes. So the book couldn't exist without Paul Dye. That's why it's dedicated to him. He didn't have to do that. He asked for nothing. He just answered the questions of a little idiot and helped me in a way that I will be forever grateful for. Not to get too emotional, but I'm not a person that asks for help very easily. It's not been my experience that people just offer help for no reason. And Paul did. And that was pretty major for me. So anyway, that's why
I also, and I think it's probably for him, to be fair, because I think one of the conversations you'd had with him is like all the stories that have gotten it wrong.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you want to have a good time, ask an engineer what was wrong with like Apollo 13 or gravity. And the things they get so excited about, of like, I was talking to one guy and he was like, gravity, the very premise of it doesn't work because the debris would be going in a spiral, not in a circle. She wouldn't get hit with it multiple times. So I was like, oh, you're really upset about this. But I think, I'm a people pleaser, and I had talked to all these people who helped and contributed. Jeffrey Kluger was one of the people who agreed to talk to me. He wrote Apollo 13, the book, with Jim Lovell, and he just agreed to talk to me. And I said to him, I was like, one of the questions I asked him, and his answer made it into the book. I said, what do you say when people say the space program is a waste of time and a waste of money? I asked everybody this, and Paul had a really great answer. Paul's answer was, first of all, there are a number of things that we have here on Earth that were developed by NASA for the space shuttle program. We wouldn't have the ability to have mammograms without NASA. We wouldn't have Google, directions or, any of those things. But he said all of the money that NASA spends is not spent in space. It's spent here on Earth. So we're moving money around, which I appreciate the answer. Jeffrey Kluger's answer was that it's a pursuit of greatness. Like any incredible art, it is a human need to express and explore, which I thought was beautiful. A lot of people who took the time to help me, and they were all older white men. And I feel like you don't hear a lot of stories of older white men helping young women to achieve their dreams. But they all did.
And also, to be fair, I mean, as much as we don't have the left brain, they may not have the right. And so they are seeing an opportunity to be able to build a story and put it out there that will engage people in their lives.
It's an expression for them as well. Yeah. And they do get to talk about the things that, when you see a movie and it's about your job and it's not right, that's frustrating. And I listened to every single thing they said, and I made sure that I got those things right in here. Even just something small like, you can't just go on a spacewalk. You can't just be like, okay, I'm headed on a spacewalk.
One does not simply go on a spacewalk.
And I'll be back in 5 minutes. It's like, it's a process that takes hours of prep. And one of the things you have to do is lower your oxygen levels and pressure in order to be ready for the expanse of space. That takes at least 75 minutes. When you see a movie where it's like, okay, I'll go out there and fix it. It's like, well, that was 3 hours. And actually, not to get... Again, there's a lot of my brain now that wasn't there before, but like a rev is a revolution around the Earth, and so you have certain metrics you need to hit at certain revs, right? So if you're going on a spacewalk, that's putting you back 2 revs, baby. Like you can't land at the same time you thought you were going to land. Those things mattered to Paul, so they matter in this book. I wanted to do that for him.
So that's the science-y. What about just women in the space program at that time? How much of the research was also the social history?
Yeah. There's some really incredible books about the first women that joined the space program. One of them is called The Six, and it's about the 6 of them who joined in Group 8. I put Joan in Group 9 to sort of try to avoid the whole first woman in space thing. But, Sally Ride obviously was a part of that. There's that book. There's also a book called The 35 New Guys, or I think it's just called The New Guys, but it's about the 35 new guys who joined in Group 8 that did, have women and men of color. Really great books if you want to learn about what that period of time looked like, and a lot of really good information about the way that men were trying to adjust to having women around. Some of them did it better than others. There's a character in the book named Jimmy who is very, very loosely based on some of the astronauts that I read about who had trouble adjusting to how to, I don't know other way to put it, how to respect women as their peers. And women had a lot of... There was a burden, and I think it's a burden that most women today understand, where they're going to make jokes about you, and do you laugh at the jokes so you don't seem uptight, or do you not laugh at the jokes because that's not funny and you shouldn't do that? And you're damned either way. And so that's a big topic of conversation within the book as well, that when you're dealing with an injustice like that, there is often no easy answer, but a lot of times what we tend to do is attack each other rather than focus in together on the culprit. And so you can't talk about women in STEM, especially at that period of time, and not talk about that.
And what about the queer history part of it? Was there actually a policy, like on paper, of not being out?
This is the way these things work, right? Is that it's never on paper, but there were so many government organizations that you could not explicitly be gay. And they would never say it directly, and there's plausible deniability and all of this gray area. But ultimately, when we look at Sally Ride, we're looking at a person who knew she wanted to be the first woman in space. Were they going to give her that opportunity if they knew she was gay? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Astronauts are, especially at that period of time, looked at as so American. This is a symbol of American excellence. And in the early 1980s, I don't think we allowed that to include queer people.
So that actually brings me to character. How did you find your way to Joan? Was she early in the process? Did you know immediately who you wanted her to be? Let's start there. I'll jump on it.
So I had written about these really sort of brash women. Carrie Soto is so outspoken, and Daisy Jones does whatever she wants, and Evelyn Hugo is so self-possessed, and a lot of the Riva girls in Malibu Rising are strong and stoic, and I just wanted to do something different. And I really liked the idea of what if this is just the sweetest, nicest lady who needs to grow a backbone a little bit. She's brilliant, but she's quiet. And that was when Joan came to me was, oh, she's gay and she's 30 and has no idea. And what does that look like? And how does that happen? It requires you to not ask certain questions of yourself. It requires you to be okay with a status quo. What are other status quos that she would maybe let lie because she wasn't ready to tackle the truth? And I came to have such affection for her because she is a good person and she will do the hard things when the time comes, even if it's going to upset other people. And that's upsetting other people is not a problem for Daisy Jones. She doesn't care. Joan does.
So this actually might answer the question. The question I was going to ask is, do you think you would have written the same book if Vanessa had been the main character and the person that you were tracking? Do you feel that maybe you've already written that book?
If you're saying, would it be the same book if Vanessa were the main character?
If you were watching it through Vanessa's eyes, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, Vanessa's so cool.
She's so cool. God.
She's so cool, you know? I think part of what it is with Vanessa is Vanessa has a different lesson to learn, and it is maybe more on the not necessarily a lesson that I've written before, but she is a person that is just more self-possessed, you know? And so what was fun about Vanessa is, okay, she's showing up fully formed. This is a person who knows who she is and she knows what she wants, and it's bold. She wants to fly the space shuttle even though no woman can fly the space shuttle. It's actually the way that NASA is set up, that would be impossible.
Yeah, can you actually explain that? Because I found that a very interesting part of the history.
So there are two types of astronauts. They're the ones that come from the military, those can be pilots. The ones that come from, they're civilians, they cannot be pilots. So during that period of time, women could not fly planes in the military. And that means that women have no experience flying planes in the military. It doesn't matter how many times you've flown a plane commercially or privately, it doesn't count if it's not in the military. So you can't be a pilot in the space shuttle program if you're a woman, because you can't get the experience in the military. And they say, like, no, we have nothing against women. It's like, well, the system is directly set up to prevent women from flying this shuttle. And it took a really long time for them to change that. But the thing, and it comes up in the book, you know, there's a military requirement, and then there is, I believe, a college requirement. There were certain military pilots that were so great that NASA forewent the college requirement. But there are no female pilots that you will forgo the military requirement. You know, it's just, it's...
Is that still the case? Do you know?
No. Well, I don't... there have been women that have flown the shuttle. So, and the military changed, but I don't know if they changed their policy or if it was just when the military changed that allowed.
The pathway was there.
Yeah, but women have since flown the shuttle and have captained the ISS, and it's incredible. I mean, you look at Sunita, who just went up. You know, I don't know if you heard, but there was last year 2 people, Butch Williams was the other one, who went up in a shuttle to ISS, and they were supposed to come right back down. I think it was like 3 days later, and they were stuck there for 9 months. And it pretty incredible. But that was the story, not a woman in space, right? And that's that is one of the ways that the world has changed.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. We're going to talk about character here for a second. And I wasn't going to do this, and then yesterday I was sitting in on the session with Rachel Kushner and Rebecca Romney, and it was on writers on reading.
Okay, yeah.
Okay? And Rachel just like threw one off that I grabbed my phone and I was like, hang on. Rachel said in a conversation, character is continuity, but anything can happen. So in other words, if you can anchor a story around a character, and that character is consistent and believable and sympathetic, and we can track their arc, that's the story, and then everything else is plot.
Yeah. Yeah,
Do you agree?
Sounds right to me. I mean, I've always said, I don't really care what happens. I don't care how it happens. I just care who it happens to. That, to me, is the story. If I don't care about the main character, why am I continuing? Occasionally, you'll get a thriller where the plot is just so crazy that you keep reading because that's, that's the fun of it. But I'm not sure that story sticks with you, you know? Thrillers that have incredible characters that you're rooting for, you feel connected to, or you hate them but you're rooting for them, or whatever it is, you're invested. That's going to make a great thriller, and I think that's true for any genre. It's about the people. I think we ultimately read for the people. I could write anything set anywhere, and if I don't give you a character that you care about for one reason or another, I don't think you'd keep reading. It wouldn't matter how transportive the setting, just think about it. Like, I put you on a beach in Hawaii with a nobody, and you don't really care. But I give you a character who's, I don't know, a movie star with a mission to manipulate every single person in her path until she becomes the most famous woman in the world. It doesn't matter where it is, right? And I think that's what a story is to me. If it's not about the person, I don't know.
No, even like you're saying, you're trying to find the space, the drama. Like,
Yeah.
what do I have to do to the payload doors?
Right. It's all scaffolding, right? It's the thing I have to do the work on that I don't feel like doing because I have these 2 people and I need to tell you about them and I need to tell you why their love is so special. And, when we talk about, finishing the book, which was so hard, and is it the curiosity that pulls me forward? Some of it, yes. But also some of it is, I have to so that I can give you these 2 people. That's why I'm pushing forward. Because, if I just finish it, then you'll understand that when Joan says this, it will mean this. And that's what carries me through.
Yeah, yeah. Is this the hardest book you've written?
Oh, by a large, large margin.
Galactically
And I'll never do it again. I mean, it's like, I've never run a marathon in my life, but when other people are like, yeah, I just did it. I ran a marathon. I'm like, me too. I know what that is like. It was very, very hard. I almost quit multiple times. My husband had to, not tell me to finish, more just listen to me as I told him I would not finish. It was really, really hard. And I remember multiple times like looking at those NASA documents and being like, I don't understand them. I'll never understand them. I'll never get this done. And you just chip away at it, and eventually you get there. But I definitely, when I finished that book, I went, all right, whatever the next book is, not that much research. I can't do it.
Has that been true?
Sort of.
I was going to say, I don't believe you at this point. I just don't. You're not a reliable narrator.
That's fair.
Of your own process. that voice of you that was inside you saying, I'm not sure I can do this, I'm not sure I can land the shuttle
The
here.
plane, yeah.
Is that, at this point, a lot of external voices of readership, of the fact that you know when you drop a book it's going to be splashy and people are actually going to read it? There is a certain freedom in, as much as it's terrible to, you know, be an author with no one's reading, there is a certain freedom in that.
Yeah.
Do you have, to me, you're a writer's writer, and by that I mean you sit in the chair and you work at something until you figured it out, and it's so commendable and so admirable, but I've also watched over the, 700 years we've apparently known each other, how the dynamics change when you know you have...
Yeah, there's pressure. Yeah, there's pressure, and I think also... when you've had any amount of success, there are always people that want to be the one that can prove that you actually suck and they saw it the whole time. And so definitely with this book, I was like, if I don't figure out exactly what the tool that fixes the hinges on the payload bay door is called and how it is used, they will come for me.
The internet people will come for me.
Yeah. And here's the thing. I thought for months of my life, I was like, and that's why I must get everything 100% right. And there cannot be a single mistake in this book. And I have to find it, and then I was like, oh, no matter what, I'm going to fail if that's my metric. Like, every book has errors in it. I think I alone will release the one book that has no errors. And also, when I chose something I knew nothing about, and most people have at least a PhD in, right? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And so I've done a lot of internal work to understand that, my work is imperfect. And people are going to have opinions about it. And some of their opinions are going to be right. Some of the things I've done were not right. They didn't get it right. I get a lot of stuff wrong. And once I accepted that, it was easier to see how I could finish the book, because it wasn't like it will only be done once it is perfect. There is no perfect. And also the thing that my therapist was like, yeah, there's no perfect. And I was like, I'll go one further. Even if there was perfect, I could not achieve it. And she was like, well, that's weird. I don't know if we want. And I was like, no, I think I need to tell myself that, because if there's no perfect, it's like, but I'm as close to perfect as they come. Is like, I think I'm such a perfectionist, and it's like, no, this book will never be perfect. I'm not searching for perfect. I'm particularly incapable of perfect, so it would be silly to try. And that seems to be working for my brain. So sometimes you just have to do what works and not what the therapist says. Right. Do not tell her I said that.
No, absolutely not. Okay, your first 4 books, you've kind of been doing these as sets. Mm-hmm. Your first 4 books were contemporary novels about normal women in extraordinary circumstances, what I kind of think of as your thought experiment books.
Yes, yeah.
Like, what if your husband died 9 days after you were married and his mother didn't even know you existed? Mm-hmm. What if you thought your husband died, but then he comes back after you've already started a life with someone else? Your next 4 were, as we're talking about, famous, powerful women in subsequent decades in different industries and the arts. Is Atmosphere kicking off another quartet?
That's interesting. Yes and no. I'm working on a book now that's totally different than Atmosphere, and on its face would have nothing in common with it, but it structurally is quite similar, and in some ways asking a different but adjacent question. And so I do wonder, I can never see what I'm doing. Like, the flashlight is only showing me 1 foot ahead, so I only know this book. But it wouldn't surprise me if the one that follows this also asks a question like that. I'm not sure, but I do see Atmosphere and the book I'm writing now as being oddly in conversation with one another, even though on its face you'd be like, what? But I actually think they have more in common than it seems at first blush.
Well, that actually leads to the kind of one of our wrap-up questions. I have a couple, but we have, 10 minutes? Okay, we can do this today. Okay. Do you think that you have a core story? Like, is there a theme?
Yeah.
that runs through all your books?
100%.
Okay.
I'm curious if you see it. It's so obvious to me, and I find it sort of embarrassing. I have exposed myself. It's always, I feel like I'm giving away the keys to the kingdom. It's always found family. It's always you're in search of the people who will love you and accept you in a way that you have not learned how to accept yourself yet. And I will also say this. I didn't realize that I had done it, but all 4 of the famous women books, they all end the same way, which I didn't realize, which is that all of those women let go of their ambition and choose instead to focus on their life instead of their work. And in reading those, I realized, like, oh.
Is this therapy?
Yeah. I was like, I do not fundamentally believe that a person can be famous and still belong to themselves. And I didn't realize that I thought that until I wrote it 4 times. I was like, and then she quits. Yeah. And I'm like, wait, I think someone had to point it out to me. But I don't see a happy ending for any of those women if they say, yes, I like people judging me all day. It's worth it for all the power and money I have. Yeah. You know, it's like, it has to be. It has to be that answer. So you do learn a lot about yourself that was sort of living in your subconscious when you write these things. Sometimes I worry that I have told too much of myself and I don't realize how much I've shown you all. But that's the gig.
I don't think so, because I will say that as someone who I do feel is like probably intimately familiar with your work, that had not occurred to me.
Okay, good.
So yeah, I mean, because I do think the found family thing, absolutely, and I think that you're part of what, I mean, I love the way you write about fame so much, because I've said this with Malibu Rising, where, you know, Evelyn and Desi are ambitious, and in Malibu Rising, you have someone who is reluctantly, kind of accidentally famous, like born into it and grappling with that. And I've always felt, in a way, that's your most deft portrayal of that, because that's a hard needle to thread. Yeah. And so I would not have, on its face, like tied those together, but you're absolutely right. That's fascinating. Okay. What is your story backlog like? How many ideas are perfectly formed, but just waiting to come out? Or how much does like market conditions determine this? I mean, you just said that, you know, you don't have, if you know when it's a book, if you just have a hook or you just have a thought, but you don't have the book yet, like.
Yeah, so I won't write a book that doesn't have a hook to it. And that is because it's at times, I think people have confused my intention with that, like my agents sometimes, with marketing. It's not marketing. It's, I want you to see that book and go, I gotta read it, because that feeling feels good. As a reader, when I see a book like that, and I'm like, oh, I got this book this morning, I wanna read it tonight, that feels so good. So it's not that I'm trying to get you to buy it by the hook. I'm trying to give you that feeling of like, oh, I wanna read this tonight. I love that feeling. And so it's gotta be something where when I hear it, I go, ooh, yes. And then also it has to be something where I see it. Like my friend Ashley's a writer. She has a ton of ideas. We write stuff together sometimes. A lot of her ideas are super good. I'm like, you should write that. I'm not the person to write that. I couldn't tell you what it is about it. It's a good idea, but I don't see it. So it's not an us thing because I don't see it. I can't write something I don't see. And so it's all about just that feeling. It has to give me the feeling of yes, so that maybe it gives you that feeling of yes. Reading should be fun. And I really do take that part of my job so seriously, especially now when young people are reading even less and high school kids are not reading books. If I can get a 16-year-old to read a book because it sounded fun, if I can use that opportunity to try to tell that 16-year-old, ways the world could be, things she doesn't have to accept, people she does need to look out for, things that are happening in the world that she should stand up against, you know? If I can do that by just making it sound fun, that's when a book is real to me. So I've got so many ideas in my head and so many things I'm excited to write. I have one story in particular I would love to write. As a writer, it would be just a dream to write it. But I don't know what the hook is yet. I don't know how to make it so exciting for that 16-year-old or that mom who's super busy and you know, raising 3 kids and doesn't have time for herself. What makes her say, I need time to finish this book, right? Until I have that for that story, it's sitting on the shelf because it's got to be fun.
So how do you decide, given that? I mean, so how many are like fully baked if you wanted to turn your attention to?
Like at right now?
Yeah.
Like a solid 4 or 5.
That feels right to me. So if you, at that point then, how are you deciding which you bring off the back burner?
Yeah. So it has to do with whether I understand what the story is and I'm not just like cruising on vibes. And also when that hook comes in, there's always going to be, like with Daisy Jones, I had the idea of singers and I loved the idea of like they're singing songs about each other in front of each other. But how do I make that work? It wasn't until I understood it needed to be a fictionalized oral history that it's like, now I understand why that book's fun. Now I understand why that book feels like a big book. That when I see it in the Barnes & Noble, I'm going to go, yes, you know? And so they're all just missing that element. But the way my brain works is I will finish the book I'm working on now. It will be about 1 to 2 days, and then I will be in the shower, and the hook for one of those books is going to come. And then there we go. And it's
like a deli counter.
Yeah, exactly. Next,
all the numbers.
I have told my husband I'm taking time off before I write another book. And then I told my agent this, and she was like, why are you telling me this? And I was like, because I need you to hold me to it. Like, I need someone to stop me from sitting down at this computer, because I love ideas. And execution is rough, man. It's tiring.
We all just scoffed at you. I mean, like, sorry, I'll support you or whatever, but I was like, this is a fool's errand. This isn't actually happening.
It's a boy who cried wolf situation, and I deserve everything coming to me.
Okay, I want to do a fast 5 here. We only have
Great.
2.5 minutes, but that said,
I'll be
we're also
quick.
the last session, so like maybe they won't cut the mic. Maybe this time. Maybe they won't cut the mic. Thank you. Okay, so what's the best part of this job?
Oh, the love stories. I mean, just thinking of a love story and then thinking of the perfect thing for someone to say and then melting your own heart with it is so much fun.
You once said that, I remember that so distinctly. You once said, you were like, I know I was meant to write this stuff because I'll watch anything, and then my first question will be like, when do they kiss?
Yeah, 100%. When do they kiss? Always. Yeah, and then I think also it's when you have a reader who has been through something similar to what you've written about, and you can tell that it matters to them. I've been very, very fortunate because I write about queer women to have so many women come up to me and say that they realized that they were bisexual during the period of time they were reading the book or whatever it was, or they felt less alone, or they felt like they could tell their mom that they were gay because she read, you know, and it just like, there's nothing, I will die feeling like I did something that mattered if I made queer women feel a little bit more comfortable in their own skin. So that's really very gratifying.
What's the hardest?
Internet comments.
Yeah.
The internet.
The people of the internet.
All of the internet, I think. Yeah.
What else would you be doing if not this?
Okay. I often say baker. I would also say architect. But those are kind of like...
Science-y. They're a little mathy.
Yeah, a little architecture definitely is too mathy for me. Hear me out though. What if I made perfumes? What if I was a perfumier?
Perfumier?
I don't know. I love a perfume. I love to smell things. We have this joke in my family where like when we walk past anything that has candles or perfume or whatever, that my family will give me a number of smells I'm allowed to have because otherwise we'll be there all, I'm like 5 smells? It's like fine. And it's like, because otherwise I will smell every single one and we'll be in that store forever. I love a good smell, so maybe I would make a perfume.
Okay. Well, yeah, you're going to make now it's going to be like a line,
Yeah.
a Taylor Jenkins CGR.
I would love that. And you know what? Every single one of them will be like, is this for a boy or is this for a girl? Don't know.
Doesn't matter. What's a book you wish you'd written?
Oh, you know, it's funny. we were talking about this earlier, you and I, but atonement. I'm so, I mean, I could never. And talk about like, that's the twist. And there is no other twist that tops it. I mean, maybe Gone Girl tops it, which you know intimately.
That's a good one.
It's, yeah, perfect
Okay,
book.
on that note, if you could get notes on one of your books from any writer, living or dead.
What a good one. That's so hard, that's so hard. Oh, they could be dead.
Yeah.
Nora Ephron. Yeah.
Fantastic. Taylor,
Julia.
thank you for doing this.
Thank you for doing it. Yeah, nicely done.
Thank you, guys.